UK government examines the structures shaping political life in the UK, covering the constitution and the roles carried out by the legislative, executive and judicial branches. This exam explores how these institutions interact, how their powers have developed over time and where authority is currently located within the political system. There is also a choice of one non-core political idea, each with its own principles, internal debates, key thinkers and views on human nature, the state, society and the economy.
A constitution is a set of rules and principles that determine how a country is governed and outline the rights of its citizens. There have been many changes to the UK constitution affecting the way the country runs and the powers the devolved bodies have. There have been many acts of parliament that has developed the constitution, each affecting the powers of the government bodies in the UK. The main acts of parliament that developed the constitution into what it is today are the Magna Carta 1215, the Bill of Rights 1689, the Act of Settlement 1701, the Acts of Union 1707, and the Parliament Act 1911 and 1949. The Magna Carta limited the power of the monarchy by establishing the principle that the king was subject to the law, which laid the foundation for constitutional government. The Bill of Rights restricted the powers of the monarch and enhanced parliamentary authority by establishing principles such as free elections and freedom of speech within Parliament. The Act of Settlement ensured Protestant succession to the throne and reinforced judicial independence, strengthening the separation of powers within the Constitution. The Act of Union united England and Scotland under one Parliament, creating the United Kingdom and establishing the constitutional framework for a unitary state. The Parliament Act of 1911 reduced the power of the House of Lords by limiting its ability to block money bills and restricting its delaying powers on legislation. The Parliament Act of 1949 further reduced the House of Lords' power by shortening the time it could delay legislation from 2 years to 1. The UK Constitution is uncodified, unentrenched, and unitary, meaning it is not written in a single document, can be changed easily, and central government holds supreme authority. A codified constitution is a single, authoritative document that outlines the fundamental laws of a country, whereas an uncodified constitution is based on multiple sources such as statutes, conventions, and common law. An example of the uncodified constitution affecting political events in the UK is the 2019 prorogation of Parliament, where the Supreme Court ruled that Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament was unlawful based on constitutional principles. An entrenched constitution is one that requires special procedure for amendments, whereas an unentrenched constitution can be changed by simple majority in Parliament. An example of the unentrenched constitution affecting political events in the UK is the rapid passage of emergency laws during the COVID-19 pandemic, which temporarily altered citizens' freedoms without requiring constitutional amendments. Federal constitution is one where power is divided between central and regional governments, whereas unitary constitution is one where sovereignty is concentrated in the central government. An example of the unitary constitution affecting political events in the UK is the UK government's decision to override parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol in 2022, demonstrating its ultimate authority over devolved matters. The twin pillars of the UK constitution are parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law. Parliamentary sovereignty means that Parliament has the supreme authority to make or repeal any law, ensuring that no legal authority can override its decisions. An example of parliamentary sovereignty affecting political events in the UK is the Brexit process, where Parliament passed the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 to remove EU law's supremacy over UK law. The rule of law means that all individuals and institutions, including the government, are subject to and accountable under the law, ensuring legal fairness and protection of rights. An example of the rule of law affecting political events in the UK is the Supreme Court's 2022 ruling that the government's plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda was unlawful, as it violated domestic and international legal protections. The 5 main sources of the UK Constitution are statute law, common law, conventions, authoritative works, and treaties. Statute law consists of laws passed by Parliament, such as the Human Rights Act 1998 and the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011. The Human Rights Act 1998 incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law, strengthening the Constitution by allowing individuals to challenge public authorities in domestic courts for breaches of their rights. The Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011 set a 5-year cycle for general elections, affecting the Constitution by limiting the Prime Minister's ability to call early elections without Parliament approved. Common law is law developed through judicial decisions rather than statutes, such as the principle of habeas corpus and the ruling in Intick v. Carrington 1765, protecting against unlawful government intrusion. Conventions are unwritten rules that guide political practices, such as the Salisbury Convention preventing the Lords from blocking manifesto commitments and the principle that the Prime Minister must be a member of the Commons. Authoritative works are legal commentaries that clarify constitutional rules, such as A.V. Dicey's Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution and Walter Bagehot's The English Constitution. Treaties are formal agreements with other nations that influence the UK constitution, such as the Treaty of Maastricht 1992, which established the European Union, and the Good Friday Agreement 1998, which helped peace in Northern Ireland. There have been many changes to the Constitution since 1997 under the Labour government, coalition government, and the Conservative government. The Constitution was changed under Labour between 1997 and 2010 through House of Lords reforms, electoral reform, devolution, the Human Rights Act 1998, and the creation of the Supreme Court. Labour reformed the House of Lords to reduce hereditary influence and make it more democratic, which affected the Constitution by increasing the power of appointed life peers and strengthening parliamentary accountability. Labour implemented electoral reforms to improve representation in devolved governments, which affected the Constitution by introducing proportional representation in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, altering the traditional first-past-the-post system. Devolution is the transfer of power from central government to regional governments, allowing them to make decisions on certain policy areas independently. Labour implemented devolution to address demands for greater regional self-governance, which affected the Constitution by decentralising power and creating distinct legislative bodies in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The Human Rights Act 1998 incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law, which affected the Constitution by allowing individuals to challenge public authorities in domestic courts breaches of their rights. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the UK, responsible for ruling on constitutional and legal matters independently of Parliament. Labour implemented the Supreme Court to separate judicial and legislative powers, which affected the Constitution by enhancing judicial independence and removing the Law Lords from the House of Lords. The Constitution was changed under the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition between 2010 and 2015 through the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act 2011 and further devolution to Wales. The Fixed-Term Parliaments Act 2011 set a 5-year election cycle which affected the Constitution by restricting the Prime Minister's ability to call early elections without parliamentary approval. The coalition government granted further devolution to Wales to give it more legislative autonomy, which affected the Constitution by strengthening Welsh self-governance and reducing central government control over Welsh affairs. Since 2015, constitutional reforms have included the Scotland Act 2016, the European Union Withdrawal Act 2017, the English Votes for English Laws Act 2017, the Wales Act 2020, and the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act 2022. The Scotland Act 2016 gave Scotland control over income tax rates and certain welfare powers, which affected the Constitution, increasing Scottish autonomy within the UK. The European Union Withdrawal Act 2017 repealed the European Communities Act 1972, which affected the Constitution by ending the supremacy of EU or in the UK legal system. The English Votes for English Laws Act 2017 ensured that only English MPs could vote on legislation affecting England alone, which affected the Constitution by addressing concerns over the influence of Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish MPs on English-only matters. The Wales Act 2020 granted the Sen more control over areas such as transport, energy, and elections, which affected the Constitution by strengthening Welsh devolution and making its government more independent from Westminster. The Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act 2022 repealed the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act 2011, which affected the Constitution by restoring the Prime Minister's power to call early general elections without requiring parliamentary approval. Devolution is the transfer of powers from the UK Parliament to regional governments in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, as well as to local authorities in England. Devolution in England has included the creation of regional authorities, the establishment of a city government in London, and the introduction of English votes for English laws. Regional authorities have powers over transport, housing, and economic development, granted by the Local Democracy, Economic Development and Construction Act 2009 and subsequent legislation, which has decentralised decision-making and altered the balance within the UK constitution. The city government in London, led by the Mayor and the London Assembly, has powers over transport, policing and economic development, granted by the Greater London Authority Act 1999, which has strengthened regional governance within the UK Constitution. English votes for English laws was introduced to give English MPs greater say over laws affecting only England through procedures established in 2015, which has addressed concerns over legislative fairness but also complicated parliamentary procedures. Devolution in England has led to greater local decision-making but has also raised questions about the asymmetry of devolution within the UK, influencing debates on constitutional reform. The Scottish Parliament has legislative powers over health, education and justice granted by the Scotland Act 1998, which established Scotland as a distinct legal jurisdiction within the UK. The Scotland Act 2012 granted additional tax-raising powers, increasing Scotland's fiscal autonomy and altering the financial structure of the UK constitution. The Scotland Act 2016 granted further powers over welfare and income tax, reinforcing Scotland's legislative independence and deepening constitutional divergence from Westminster. Scottish devolution has strengthened calls for independence, altered the UK's political structure, and necessitated new constitutional arrangements to manage intergovernmental relations. The Welsh Assembly has powers over education, health and transport, initially granted by the Government of Wales Act 1998, which introduced a devolved legislature with executive authority. The Government of Wales Act 2006 granted the Assembly the ability to pass primary legislation, increasing its legislative autonomy and shifting power away from Westminster. The Welsh Assembly has powers over education, health and transport, initially granted by the Government of Wales Act 1998, which introduced a devolved legislature with executive authority. The Government of Wales Act 2006 granted the Assembly the ability to pass primary legislation, increasing its legislative autonomy and shifting power away from Westminster. The Northern Ireland Assembly has powers over health, education and justice granted by the Northern Ireland Act 1998, which established a power-sharing government to maintain peace. The Northern Ireland Act 2006 reaffirmed the Assembly's legislative authority following suspension, demonstrating the fragility and adaptability of devolution in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Act 2020 introduced new provisions ensuring the continuity of devolved government, addressing the instability of Northern Ireland's political system. Northern Irish devolution has played a crucial role in maintaining peace under the Good Friday Agreement, but has also highlighted challenges in sustaining stable governance within divided society. There are many debates on whether previous reforms should be extended and whether devolved bodies should be granted more power. There are also arguments for changing the nature of the Constitution. The House of Lords should be reformed further as it remains unelected and unaccountable, undermining democratic legitimacy. However, it should not be reformed because it provides expert scrutiny and a check on the government without electoral pressures. The electoral system should be reformed further as first past the post produces disproportionate results and limits voter choice. However, it should not be reformed because it provides strong and stable government while maintaining the constituency link. The Human Rights Act 1998 should be extended as it protects fundamental freedoms and ensures government accountability. However, it should not be extended because it limits parliamentary sovereignty and allows courts too much influence over political decisions. The powers of the Supreme Court should be extended as it strengthens the judiciary's ability to check executive power and uphold the rule of law. However, they should not be extended because it risks undermining parliamentary sovereignty and politicizing the judiciary. The Fixed-Term Parliaments Act should be extended as it prevents opportunistic early elections and ensures political stability. However, it should not be extended because it restricts the government's ability to respond flexibly to political crises. Devolution in England should be extended further as it would address the democratic deficit outside London and give local regions more control. However, devolution should not be extended because it could create regional disparities and weaken the role of Parliament. Devolution in Scotland should be extended further as it reflects the distinct political identity of Scotland and increases self-governance. However, devolution should not be extended because it risks independence movements and weakening the UX unity. Devolution in Wales should be extended further as it enhances democratic representation and allows for policies tailored to Welsh needs. However, devolution should not be extended because Wales has fewer resources than Scotland, making greater autonomy more challenging. Devolution in Northern Ireland should be extended further as it strengthens local governance and supports the Good Friday Agreement. However, devolution should not be extended because political instability in Northern Ireland makes further devolution unpredictable and fragile. The UK constitution should be changed to be codified as it would provide clarity, limit government overreach, and protect rights more effectively. However, it should not be changed because the current system is flexible, adaptable, and allows Parliament to respond quickly to crises. The UK constitution should be changed to be entrenched as it would prevent governments from making significant constitutional changes too easily. However, it should not be changed because it would reduce flexibility and make necessary reforms harder to achieve. The UK Constitution should be changed to include a Bill of Rights as it would strengthen individual protections and limit government power more effectively. However, it should not be changed because the Human Rights Act already provides protections and a Bill of Rights could reduce parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament is the supreme legislative body of the United Kingdom, responsible for making and scrutinising laws, representing the public and holding the government to account. Parliament is structured as a bicameral system, meaning it has two separate chambers, the elected House of Commons and the appointed House of Lords, where both work together in the lawmaking process. The House of Commons consists of the government, formed by the political party with the most seats, the official opposition, which is the party with the second highest number of seats, frontbenchers, who are ministers or shadow ministers, backbenchers, who are MPs without ministerial positions, and the Speaker, who presides over debates and maintains order. The role of the House of Commons is to propose, debate, and pass legislation, scrutinise the actions of the government, represent constituents, and approve government spending. An example of the House of Commons failing to fulfil its role was the lack of effective scrutiny over the awarding of COVID-19 contracts, where concerns were raised about transparency and accountability. The House of Lords consists of life peers, hereditary peers, and bishops, where life peers are appointed based on merit. Hereditary peers inherit their titles, and bishops represent the Church of England. The role of the House of Lords is to scrutinise legislation, amend bills, provide expertise, and hold the government to account. An example of the House of Lords failing to fulfil its role was the approval of the illegal migration bill in 2023, despite concerns over human rights implications. Members of the House of Commons are selected through general elections, where voters elect MPs to represent constituencies under a first-past-the-post system. The leader of the government is the Prime Minister, chosen by the governing party, while the leader of the opposition is the head of the second-largest party, elected by its members. The Speaker of the House of Commons is elected by MPs through a secret ballot and is expected to remain impartial. Peers in the House of Lords are appointed members consisting of life peers, hereditary peers, and bishops. Life peers are appointed by the Prime Minister and approved by the monarch. Hereditary peers inherit their titles, and a limited number are elected among themselves, and bishops are senior members of the Church of England. The functions of the House of Commons include legislating, scrutinising the government, representing constituents, and approving financial measures. An example of legislating being fulfilled was the passage of the Online Safety Act in 2023 to regulate online content. An example of scrutiny being fulfilled was the Partygate inquiry in 2022, holding the government accountable for breaking COVID-19 regulations. An example of representation being fulfilled was MPs advocating for increased energy bill support in 2022 following public pressure. An example of financial approval not being fulfilled was the 2022 mini-budget by Liz Truss's government, which led to economic instability. The functions of the House of Commons are generally fulfilled to a greater extent due to its democratic legitimacy and direct accountability to the electorate. However, the functions of the House of Commons are sometimes limited by government majorities, rushed legislation, and lack of transparency in decision-making. The functions of the House of Lords include revising legislation, delaying bills for further scrutiny, providing expertise, and checking government power. An example of revising legislation being fulfilled was the House of Lords amending the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill in 2022 to protect protest rights. An example of delaying bills being fulfilled was the Lords delaying the Brexit Withdrawal Agreement Bill in 2019 to allow further scrutiny. An example of providing expertise being fulfilled was Lords contributing to detailed amendments to the Environment Act 2021 to strengthen environmental protections. An example of checking government power being fulfilled was the Lords rejecting parts of the Elections Act 2022 that restricted voter ID requirements. The functions of the House of Lords are fulfilled to a greater extent when it effectively revises and improves legislation through expertise and amendments. However, the functions of the House of Lords are sometimes limited by its lack of democratic legitimacy, its inability to permanently block legislation, and government dominance in the legislative process. The UK Parliament has many powers split between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, with many debates over the effect of these powers on the UK and democracy. The exclusive powers of the House of Commons include the authority to grant money to the government through approving bills that raise taxes, the right to impose taxes and to vote money to or withhold it from public departments and services, and the ability to remove government members. In 2023, the House of Commons exercised its exclusive power over taxation by passing the Finance Bill, which outlined the government's budget and tax changes for the fiscal year. In 2022, the House of Commons demonstrated its authority over public expenditure by approving the allocation of funds for the NHS and other public services through the Appropriation Bill. In 2019, the House of Commons exercised its power to remove government members by passing a motion of no confidence against Prime Minister Theresa May's government, leading to her resignation. The main powers of the House of Lords include scrutinising and amending legislation passed by the House of Commons, holding the government to account through debates and questions, and delaying legislation for up to 1 year. In 2022, the House of Lords exercised its power of legislative scrutiny by considering 5,244 changes to 100 bills, raising concerns and pressing the government for action on various issues. In 2023, the House of Lords held the government to account by conducting debates and daily oral questions on topics such as ambulance delays, social care vacancies, and the cost of living. In 2024, the House of Lords exercised its power to delay legislation by postponing the passage of a controversial bill for further consideration, effectively delaying its enactment by up to 1 year. The relative power of the House of Commons and the House of Lords positively influences the UK and its democracy by ensuring thorough legislative scrutiny, as demonstrated in 2015 when the Lords voted down proposed tax credit cuts, prompting the government to reconsider its approach. This balance allows for the representation of diverse expertise evident in the Lords' detailed examination of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018, where they suggested numerous amendments to address potential issues. Additionally, the Lords' ability to delay legislation provides a check on hasty governmental actions, as seen in their scrutiny of the United Kingdom Internal Market Act 2020, raising concerns about its impact on devolution. However, the relative power of the House of Commons and the House of Lords can negatively impact the UK and its democracy by creating potential conflicts of interest, highlighted by a 2025 investigation revealing that over 90 peers received payments from commercial companies for political advice, undermining public trust. Its power dynamic can also lead to legislative gridlock, exemplified by the 2019 prorogation controversy, where the suspension of Parliament hindered legislative progress and sparked constitutional debates. Furthermore, the unelected nature of the House of Lords raises questions about democratic legitimacy, as their influence over legislation can contradict the elected mandate of the House of Commons, leading to tensions between democratic accountability and appointed oversight. The legislative process in the United Kingdom is a structured sequence through which proposed laws, known as bills, are scrutinised, debated, and either enacted or rejected by Parliament. The legislative process consists of the Green Paper, White Paper, first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, third reading, House of Lords stages, consultation stage, and royal assent. The Green Paper is an initial consultation document published by the government to outline potential policy changes and invite feedback. The White Paper is a more detailed proposal following the Green Paper that sets out the government's intentions and forms the basis of bill. The first reading is a formal stage where the bill is introduced to Parliament without debate, allowing MPs or Lords to review its contents. The second reading is the first opportunity for MPs or Lords to debate the general principles of the bill before voting on whether it should proceed. The committee stage is where a group of MPs or Lords examines the bill in detail, suggesting amendments and scrutinizing its provisions. The report stage allows further consideration and amendments to the bill, particularly those suggested during the committee stage. The third reading is the final opportunity for MPs or Lords to debate the bill before it moves to the next stage, focusing on its overall content rather than specific amendments. The House of Lords stage repeats the process from first reading to third reading, allowing further scrutiny and possible amendments. The consultation stage, known as parliamentary ping-pong, occurs if the Commons and Lords disagree on amendments, requiring negotiation until an agreement is reached. The royal assent is the final stage where the monarch formally approves the bill, making it an official law. An example of a bill that had difficulty during the legislative process was the Illegal Migration Bill 2023, which faced significant opposition in the House of Lords due to concerns over human rights implications, leading to multiple amendments and delays. The House of Commons and the House of Lords interact during the legislative process by reviewing and amending bills, with the Salisbury Convention playing a role in this. The Salisbury Convention is a constitutional convention that ensures the House of Lords does not block government bills that implement manifesto commitments. For example, during the Labour government of 1945-1951, the Lords allowed the passage of nationalisation bills outlined in the Labour Party's manifesto. Parliament interacts with the executive by scrutinising government decisions, approving legislation, questioning ministers, and holding the Prime Minister and the government to account. The role of backbenchers in the House of Commons is to scrutinise the government, contribute to debates, propose private members' bills, and represent their constituents. Backbenchers in the House of Commons are significant because they can influence legislation, hold the government to account, and raise important issues, but they are not significant when party discipline and government majorities limit their influence. An example of backbenchers in the House of Commons fulfilling their role and being significant is when Conservative MPs forced Boris Johnson to abandon parts of the Internal Market Bill in 2020 due to concerns about breaching international law. The role of backbenchers in the House of Lords is to scrutinise legislation, contribute to debates, and suggest amendments to bills without the constraint of constituency responsibilities. Backbenchers in the House of Lords are significant because they can use their expertise to influence legislation and delay government bills for further scrutiny, but they are not significant when the elected House of Commons ultimately has the final say. An example of backbenchers in the House of Lords fulfilling their role and being significant is when they successfully forced the government to make concessions on the Nationality and Borders Bill in 2022 by rejecting controversial clauses. Parliamentary privilege is the legal immunity that allows MPs and Lords to speak freely in debates without fear of legal action. Parliamentary privilege is important to backbenchers in the House of Commons and the House of Lords because it enables them to raise sensitive issues, expose misconduct, and hold the government to account without legal repercussions. Select committees investigate government policies, scrutinise public spending, and hold ministers to account through reports and questioning. An example of a select committee and what they have done is the Home Affairs Select Committee's 2023 inquiry into the asylum backlog, which led to increased government transparency on processing delays. The opposition is the largest political party in Parliament that is not in government. The role of the opposition is to challenge government policies, propose alternatives, scrutinise decisions, and hold the government to account. The opposition is significant because it provides an alternative to the government and influences policy debates, but it is not significant when the government has a strong majority and can easily pass legislation. An example of the opposition fulfilling their role is when Labour pressured the Conservative government to introduce a windfall tax on energy companies in 2022 to address the cost of living crisis. Ministerial question time is a regular session where government ministers answer questions from MPs and peers about their policies and decisions. The purpose of ministerial question time is to hold ministers accountable for their actions and ensure transparency in government decision-making. The nature of ministerial question time is that it involves direct questioning, often with critical or adversarial exchanges, and is an opportunity for MPs to raise constituency concerns. A significant example of ministerial question time is when the Foreign Secretary was questioned in 2021 about the UK's withdrawal from Afghanistan, leading to intense scrutiny of government decisions. Prime Minister's Questions is weekly session where MPs question the Prime Minister on government policies and current issues. The purpose of Prime Minister's Questions is to hold the Prime Minister accountable, allow scrutiny of government decisions, and provide platform for political debate. The nature of Prime Minister's Questions is highly adversarial, with the opposition leader and MPs challenging the Prime Minister in fast-paced and often confrontational manner. A significant example of Prime Minister's Questions is when Keir Starmer challenged Boris Johnson in 2021 over alleged lockdown parties in Downing Street, leading to increased public pressure and political controversy. The executive is the branch of government responsible for implementing laws and policies, with a structure that includes the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, junior ministers, and in government departments, while its powers extend to royal prerogative, legislative initiation, and secondary legislation, alongside the principles of ministerial responsibility and the balance of power between the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, where factors such as ministerial select and policy influence illustrate the extent of control over events and policy. The executive is the branch of government responsible for implementing laws and policies, consisting of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and then government departments with key roles including proposing legislation and making policy decisions, while holding significant powers such as royal prerogative and legislative initiation. The structure of the government consists of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, junior ministers, and government departments, where the Prime Minister leads the government. The Cabinet is made up of senior ministers who make key decisions, junior ministers support Cabinet members, and government departments implement policies. The Prime Minister is the head of government who oversees policy, represents the UK internationally, and appoints ministers. The Cabinet is a group of senior ministers, mainly heads of departments, who collectively make major policy decisions and coordinate government action. Junior ministers assist Cabinet ministers by focusing on specific policy areas and helping to implement government decisions. Government departments are specialized administrative units responsible for carrying out policies in areas such as health, education, and defense. An example of different parts of the executive interacting is when the Home Secretary worked with the Chancellor to introduce funding for increased policing in the 2019 spending review. The main roles of the executive include proposing legislation, proposing a budget, and making policy decisions within laws and budgets. Proposing legislation involves drafting new laws or amendments which are then introduced to Parliament for debate and approval. Proposing a budget requires the government to present annual financial plans detailing public spending, taxation, and economic priorities. Making policy decisions within laws and budgets involves setting national priorities and implementing policies while staying within legal and financial constraints. An example of the executive fulfilling their role is the introduction of the 2023 Energy Bill, which set out measures for energy security and net zero commitments. The main powers of the executive include royal prerogative powers, the initiation of legislation, and secondary legislative power. Royal prerogative powers are historic powers exercised by ministers on behalf of the Crown, including appointing ministers, issuing passports, and deploying armed forces. The initiation of legislation allows the government to introduce bills in Parliament, giving them control over most of the legislative agenda. Secondary legislative power enables ministers to make regulations and rules under existing laws without needing full parliamentary approval. An example of these powers being used is the Prime Minister's use of the royal prerogative in 2018 to authorize airstrikes in Syria without parliamentary approval. The ministerial responsibility is the principle where government ministers are accountable for their actions and decisions either individually or collectively. Individual ministerial responsibility is the convention where a minister must take responsibility for their personal conduct, departmental decisions, and policy failures. An example of individual ministerial responsibility is the resignation of Amber Rudd as Home Secretary in 2018 after misleading Parliament over deportation targets in the Windrush scandal. Collective ministerial responsibility is the principle where all ministers must publicly support government decisions even if they personally disagree and must resign if they cannot. An example of collective ministerial responsibility is the resignation of David Davis as Brexit Secretary in 2018 because he disagreed with Theresa May's Brexit plan. The Cabinet is a group of senior government ministers, usually heads of departments, who assist the Prime Minister in making decisions and formulating policies. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet have many powers that can affect the relationship between them, as well as events that occur and the policies that are introduced. Powers of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet include leading the executive branch, setting government policy, controlling the legislative agenda, and making key appointments. The Prime Minister leads the executive branch by directing government policy and decision-making. The Prime Minister sets government policy by outlining priorities and ensuring their implementation across departments. The Prime Minister controls the legislative agenda by deciding which policies and laws are prioritized in Parliament. The Prime Minister makes key appointments by selecting ministers, senior civil servants, and other officials. The factors governing the Prime Minister's selection of ministers include political loyalty, experience, competence, party unity, representation, and media perception. Political loyalty affects selection as the Prime Minister chooses ministers who support their leadership and policies. Experience influences selection because ministers with a strong background in government or their field bring expertise to their roles. Competence is a factor as the Prime Minister seeks ministers who can effectively manage departments and implement policy. Party unity affects selection since appointing figures from different wings of the party helps maintain cohesion. Representation is considered because a diverse cabinet in terms of geography, gender, and background enhances public appeal. Media perception influences selection as appointing ministers with strong public approval helps maintain government credibility. An example of one of these factors affecting a Prime Minister's choice of ministers is when Theresa May appointed Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary in 2016 to maintain party unity by including Brexit supporters in her government. The factors that affect the relationship between the Cabinet and the Prime Minister include the Prime Minister's leadership style, the strength of the Cabinet, party unity, media influence, and external events. The Prime Minister's leadership style affects the relationship because dominant leader may centralize power, while collaborative leader may share decision-making. The strength of the Cabinet influences the relationship as a united and influential Cabinet can limit the Prime Minister's authority. Party unity affects the relationship because divisions within the party can weaken the Prime Minister's control over the Cabinet. Media influence plays a role as negative press coverage can pressure the Prime Minister and affect Cabinet confidence. External events impact the relationship as crises, such as economic downturns or wars, can strengthen or weaken the Prime Minister's authority. An example of one of these factors affecting the relationship between the Cabinet and the Prime Minister is when Margaret Thatcher's leadership was undermined in 1990 by Cabinet resignations and internal opposition over the poll tax, leading to her resignation. The relationship between the Cabinet and the Prime Minister has changed between 1983 and 2025, with leaders such as Margaret Thatcher centralising power, Tony Blair reducing Cabinet influence through sofa government, and Boris Johnson facing Cabinet resignations that weakened his authority in 2022. The power is balanced between the Prime Minister and the Cabinet through conventions that allow the Prime Minister to lead while requiring Cabinet consensus on major decisions. This is the case because while the Prime Minister has significant authority, they depend on Cabinet support to implement policies and maintain party unity. An example of the balance of power between the Prime Minister and the Cabinet is when John Major was forced to call a leadership contest in 1995 due to Cabinet discontent, showing the limits of a Prime Minister's authority. Margaret Thatcher exerted significant control over her cabinet by enforcing strict adherence to her policies, such as her dismissal of ministers who opposed her stance on Europe. However, she lost control in 1990 when cabinet colleagues saw her as having become too inflexible regarding unpopular policies, leading to her resignation. Thatcher's decisive action during the Falklands War in 1982 showcased her command over events, yet her inability to prevent the 1984-85 miners' strike highlighted lack of control over domestic unrest. Her implementation of free market policies, such as privatization, demonstrated firm control over policy direction, whereas the widespread opposition to the poll tax in 1990, which led to riots, revealed her loss of control over policy acceptance. Tony Blair maintained tight control over his cabinet, exemplified by close cooperation between the Prime Minister's office and the Cabinet Office to support the coordination and implementation of policy. However, he faced internal dissent over the Iraq War, leading to resignations. Blair's leadership during the Northern Ireland peace process demonstrated effective event management, while his inability to prevent mass protests against the Iraq War in 2003 showed a lack of control over public sentiment. His implementation of new labour reforms, such as introducing the minimum wage, highlighted policy control, whereas the backlash against tuition fee increases in 2004 indicated challenges in maintaining policy support. Boris Johnson asserted control over his cabinet by appointing loyalists to key positions to ensure alignment with his Brexit agenda. However, he faced significant resignations in 2022 due to disagreements over his leadership style and policy decisions. Johnson's decisive action to get Brexit done showcased his influence over events, yet his inability to manage the COVID-19 pandemic effectively, leading to high infection rates, revealed a lack of control over national crises. His push for the levelling up agenda demonstrated policy direction, while the controversy over lockdown parties, known as Partygate, undermined his policy credibility. Keir Starmer has centralised authority within his cabinet, exemplified by the dramatic centralisation of authority in the cabinet committee system. However, he has faced internal disputes within the Labour Party over welfare reforms, indicating challenges in maintaining unity. Starmer's response to the Israel-Hamas conflict in 2023, where he expressed support for Israel and condemned Hamas, showcased his stance on international events, yet his inability to prevent internal party criticism over this position highlighted a lack of control over party consensus. His plans to re-centralise power to ministers, starting with the abolition of HS England to increase democratic accountability, demonstrate policy control, while backlash over proposed welfare reforms indicates challenges in policy acceptance.
There are three branches of the government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Each branch interacts and influences the other differently. The role of the Supreme Court is to act as the highest court of appeal in the United Kingdom, ensuring that laws are applied correctly and protecting the rule of law. The composition of the Supreme Court consists of 12 justices who are appointed based on merit by the King on the advice of the Prime Minister and Lord Chancellor. There are many ways the Supreme Court can influence the executive and Parliament. The key operating principles of the Supreme Court are judicial neutrality and judicial independence, which ensure fair and impartial judgments free from external influence. Judicial neutrality is the principle that judges must remain impartial and base their decisions solely on legal reasoning rather than personal or political beliefs. Judicial neutrality is upheld through a strict code of conduct, professional ethics, and the expectation that judges recuse themselves from cases where a conflict of interest could arise. The extent of judicial neutrality in the Supreme Court is generally high, though complete neutrality can be difficult due to human bias. An example of judicial neutrality occurred in 2020 when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Heathrow Airport's third runway despite environmental concerns, showing that legal reasoning outweighed political or social opinion. Judicial independence is the principle that judges must be free from interference or pressure from the executive, legislature, or any other external body. Judicial independence is upheld through security of tenure, independent appointment procedures, and protection of judicial salaries. The extent of judicial independence in the Supreme Court is very strong, as structural and legal safeguards ensure that judges can make decisions without political influence. An example of judicial independence occurred in 2019 when the Supreme Court ruled that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's prorogation of Parliament was unlawful, demonstrating that the judiciary can act independently of government. The Supreme Court influences the executive to a significant degree by holding the government accountable through judicial review and rulings that can limit executive actions. They do this by interpreting the law and determining whether government decisions or policies are lawful and consistent with constitutional principles. This influences the policymaking process by forcing the government to act within legal boundaries and sometimes to amend or withdraw policies. An example occurred in 2023 when the Supreme Court ruled the government's Rwanda asylum plan unlawful, directly affecting executive immigration policy. The Supreme Court influences Parliament to a limited degree by interpreting legislation and highlighting when laws conflict with constitutional or human rights principles. They do this through declarations of incompatibility under the Human Rights Act 1998, which signal that parliamentary laws may breach human rights obligations. An example occurred in 2018 when the Supreme Court ruled that Northern Ireland's abortion laws were incompatible with human rights standards, prompting parliamentary debate and reform. The doctrine of ultra vires is the principle that public bodies cannot act beyond the powers granted to them by law, and it affects the Supreme Court's influence over policy by allowing it to strike down unlawful executive actions. An example occurred in 2022 when the Supreme Court ruled that the Scottish Government acted beyond its powers by seeking to hold an independent referendum without Westminster's consent. Judicial review is the process where courts examine the lawfulness of actions or decisions made by public bodies, ensuring they comply with legal and constitutional limits. It affects the Supreme Court's influence over the policymaking process by allowing the judiciary to check government power and ensure accountability. An example occurred in 2021 when the Supreme Court ruled that the government's planning changes to Heathrow expansion required further environmental assessment, showing judicial oversight in policymaking. Parliament has influence over the executive through mechanisms such as scrutiny, questioning, select committees, and the power to approve or reject legislation and spending. Parliament is moderately effective at holding the executive to account, as shown in 2022 when Boris Johnson faced sustained scrutiny over the Partygate scandal that led to his resignation. The executive has influence over Parliament through control of the legislative timetable, the use of party discipline, and the power of the Prime Minister's majority to pass legislation. The executive is highly effective at exercising dominance over Parliament, as seen in 2020 when the government swiftly passed the Coronavirus Act with limited parliamentary scrutiny due to its large majority. The balance of power between Parliament and the executive has changed to a greater extent because parliamentary oversight has increased, as shown in 2019 when MPs forced the executive to publish legal advice on Brexit and delayed its plans through legislative votes. The balance of power between Parliament and the executive has changed to a lesser extent because strong party majorities still enable the government to control Parliament, as demonstrated in 2021 when the Conservative majority allowed the passage of the Nationality and Borders Act despite widespread opposition. The aims of the European Union are to promote peace, stability, and economic growth through the four freedoms of the single market alongside deeper political and economic union. The four freedoms of the single market are the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. These aims have been achieved to a greater extent through increased economic integration and cooperation, as shown in 2020 when the EU launched the €750 billion recovery fund to support member states during the COVID-19 pandemic. These aims have been achieved to a lesser extent due to political fragmentation and challenges to unity, as seen in 2016 when the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU, weakening the goal of political and economic union. The role of the European Union is to create a single market, uphold human rights, and ensure economic and political cooperation among member states, which has been achieved through policies such as the 2021 Green Deal aiming for net zero emissions by 2050. The impact of leaving the EU on UK parliamentary sovereignty was that Parliament regained full legislative control without being bound by EU law or the European Court of Justice. This impacted policy making by allowing the UK government to set independent trade, immigration, and environmental policies without EU oversight. An example of this was the introduction of the 2021 UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement, which demonstrated the UK's renewed freedom to negotiate trade deals independently. Legal sovereignty is the ultimate authority to make, amend, or repeal laws, which in the UK lies with Parliament. Political sovereignty is the practical ability to influence or determine how power is used, often exercised by the government on behalf of the electorate. Legal and political sovereignty are different because legal sovereignty refers to formal lawmaking power, while political sovereignty reflects where real decision-making influence lies. Sovereignty has moved between different branches to a greater extent as the judiciary has gained more influence, shown in 2019 when the Supreme Court ruled Boris Johnson's prorogation of Parliament unlawful, asserting judicial authority over the executive. Sovereignty has moved between different branches to a lesser extent because Parliament remains the ultimate lawmaking body, as shown in 2020 when it passed the Internal Market Act despite legal and political opposition. Sovereignty could be said to lie in the executive as the government often dominates the political agenda and decision-making, shown in 2020 when the executive swiftly implemented nationwide COVID-19 lockdowns using emergency powers with limited parliamentary approval. Sovereignty could be said to lie in the legislature as Parliament retains the ultimate authority to make and amend laws, shown in 2020 when MPs passed the EU Withdrawal Agreement Act to formally complete Brexit despite divisions across government. Sovereignty could be said to lie in the judiciary as the courts have the power to hold the executive and legislature to account, shown in 2019 when the Supreme Court ruled Boris Johnson's prorogation of Parliament unlawful, reinforcing judicial oversight over government actions. Anarchism is an ideology which has at its heart the aim of liberating people from political domination and economic exploitation. Anarchism is defined by its rejection of the state and all forms of political authority. The ideas and principles of anarchism are the rejection of the state, the belief that liberty is central to human fulfillment, the claim that anarchy creates natural order, a commitment to economic freedom, and the pursuit of a utopian stateless society. The idea of rejection of the state is that the state is immoral as it rules through coercion and deceit, protects economic inequality, and corrupts human nature, so it must be abolished. The anarchist argument against the state is that it is an unjust concentration of power which suppresses individual autonomy and freedom. The anarchist argument against power is that all hierarchical authority is illegitimate and perpetuates domination. The anarchist argument against political participation is that engagement with state institutions legitimizes oppression and distracts from genuine liberation. The anarchist argument on how the state can be overthrown is that it must be dismantled through direct action, mass resistance, and the withdrawal of consent. Based on the idea of rejection of the state, the anarchist view on human nature is that humans are naturally cooperative and corrupted only by authority. Based on the idea of rejection of the state, the anarchist view on the economy is that it should be decentralized and free from ownership or control by the state or capital. Based on the idea of rejection of the state, the anarchist view on society is that voluntary association will create harmony without imposed laws. Based on the idea of rejection of the state, the anarchist view on the state is that it is the root cause of oppression and must be abolished entirely. The idea of liberty is that true freedom is incompatible with all political, social, and economic authority and is essential to human flourishing. The differing view of liberty within anarchism is that individualist anarchists prioritize personal autonomy while collectivist anarchists emphasize freedom achieved through communal cooperation. The differing view of human nature within anarchism is that some argue humans are naturally self-interested but capable of peaceful coexistence while others argue humans are inherently moral and sociable. Based on the idea of liberty, the anarchist view on human nature is that people flourish best when free from external constraint. Based on the idea of liberty, the anarchist view on the economy is that economic arrangements must be voluntary and egalitarian. Based on the idea of liberty, the anarchist view on society is that social life should be organized through free association and mutual aid. Based on the idea of liberty, the anarchist view on the state is that it is the antithesis of freedom and therefore illegitimate. The idea of anarchy is order is that social harmony arises naturally from human interaction without imposed authority. Anarchists believe that social order occurs naturally and spontaneously, emerging from human nature, and is the key to the belief in a peaceful, stable, stateless society through voluntary cooperation and mutual aid rather than coercion. Based on the idea of anarchy is order, the anarchist view on human nature is that people are naturally inclined towards cooperation. Based on the idea of anarchy is order, the anarchist view on the economy is that economic life will organize itself through voluntary exchange and communal management. Based on the idea of anarchy is order, the anarchist view on society is that social order will arise spontaneously without institutions of power. Based on the idea of anarchy is order, the anarchist view on the state is that it is unnecessary and obstructs natural harmony. The idea of economic freedom is that individuals should manage their own economic affairs without state intervention or capitalist exploitation. The criticism of existing economic systems is that capitalism creates inequality and exploitation while socialism centralizes oppressive state control. The different ways economic freedom can be achieved are through mutualism, collectivism, anarcho-communism, or individualist markets based on voluntary cooperation. Based on the idea of economic freedom, the anarchist view on human nature is that people are capable of self-management and fair exchange. Based on the idea of economic freedom, the anarchist view on the economy is that it should be decentralized, cooperative, and based on voluntary agreement. Based on the idea of economic freedom, the anarchist view on society is that communities should organize production according to mutual benefit rather than profit or coercion. Based on the idea of economic freedom, the anarchist view on the state is that its economic role is illegitimate and must be abolished. The idea of utopia is that imagining an idealized stateless society allows anarchists to expose the flaws of existing systems. The operation of an idealized society in order to develop a critique of existing society is that it demonstrates how voluntary cooperation can replace coercive institutions. The benefits of an idealized society in order to develop a critique of existing society are that it offers a vision of harmony, equality, and freedom that inspires radical change. The criticisms leveled against anarchism as unachievable and unrealistic are that human nature is too selfish and complex societies require authority. Based on the idea of utopia, the anarchist view on human nature is that humans can aspire towards moral and cooperative behavior when free. Based on the idea of utopia, the anarchist view on the economy is that it will operate through common ownership and voluntary contribution. Based on the idea of utopia, the anarchist view on society is that it will be based on equality, mutual aid, and harmony. Based on the idea of utopia, the anarchist view on the state is that it has no place in an ideal society and should be replaced entirely by voluntary order. The different types of anarchism are collectivist anarchism and individualist anarchism. Collectivist anarchism is a belief in common ownership to nurture rational, altruistic, and cooperative human nature. The different types of collectivist anarchism are anarcho-communism, mutualism, and anarcho-syndicalism. Anarcho-communism is the belief that a stateless, classless, moneyless society based on common ownership will allow full human freedom and cooperation. The anarcho-communist view on rejection of the state is that the state must be abolished as it exists to protect capitalism and oppression. The anarcho-communist view on liberty is that true freedom can only be achieved through collective ownership and the absence of private property. The anarcho-communist view on anarchy is order is that natural social harmony will arise through voluntary cooperation without imposed authority. The anarcho-communist view on economic freedom is that wealth should be held in common and distributed based on need rather than market exchange. The anarcho-communist view on utopia is that a classless, stateless society will enable human fulfillment and social harmony. The anarcho-communist view on human nature is that humans are naturally cooperative and altruistic when freed from capitalism and the state. The anarcho-communist view on the economy is that it should be organized through common ownership and production for need. The anarcho-communist view on society is that communities will unite through mutual aid and solidarity. The anarcho-communist view on the state is that it is the root of oppression and must be permanently dismantled. Mutualism is the belief that individuals should exchange goods based on labor value through cooperative markets free from state and capitalist exploitation. The mutualist view on rejection of the state is that political authority is illegitimate and should be replaced with voluntary agreements. The mutualist view on liberty is that individuals must be free to engage in fair exchange without monopolies or coercion. The mutualist view on anarchy is order is that social stability emerges from reciprocal economic relationships. The mutualist view on economic freedom is that property should exist only through personal use and labor. The mutualist view on utopia is that a society based on equitable exchange will eliminate exploitation and foster harmony. The mutualist view on human nature is that people are rational and capable of self-management. The mutualist view on the economy is that decentralized markets based on labor value promote justice and freedom. The mutualist view on society is that it should be based on voluntary association and reciprocity. The mutualist view on the state is that it is unnecessary and should be replaced with mutual contracts. Anarcho-syndicalism is the belief that trade unions should be the vehicle for overthrowing capitalism and the state to establish worker self-management. The anarcho-syndicalist view on rejection of the state is that the state is an instrument of capitalist oppression and must be overthrown through direct action. The anarcho-syndicalist view on liberty is that workers' control of production is necessary for genuine freedom. The anarcho-syndicalist view on anarchy is order is that social order will arise from federations of worker unions. The anarcho-syndicalist view on economic freedom is that workers must own and manage industry collectively. The anarcho-syndicalist view on utopia is that a self-managed society will eliminate class conflict and create solidarity. The anarcho-syndicalist view on human nature is that people thrive when empowered to control their labor. The anarcho-syndicalist view on the economy is that production should be run by federated workers' councils. The anarcho-syndicalist view on society is that it will be organized through decentralized trade unions. The anarcho-syndicalist view on the state is that it should be replaced with a federation of workers' organizations. Individualist anarchism is a belief in unrestricted personal freedom where autonomous, competitive, and self-interested individuals can act in their own best interests. The different types of individualist anarchism are anarcho-capitalism and egoism. Anarcho-capitalism is the belief that free markets without any state interference will produce the greatest individual freedom. The anarcho-capitalist view on rejection of the state is that all state functions should be replaced by private enterprise. The anarcho-capitalist view on liberty is that individual freedom is maximized through private property and voluntary contracts. The anarcho-capitalist view on anarchy is order is that market competition naturally regulates society. The anarcho-capitalist view on economic freedom is that capitalism should operate without taxation or regulation. The anarcho-capitalist view on utopia is that a society based purely on market exchange will maximize prosperity and freedom. The anarcho-capitalist view on human nature is that individuals are rational and motivated by self-interest. The anarcho-capitalist view on the economy is that it should be entirely privatized and driven by competition. The anarcho-capitalist view on society is that relationships should be formed through contract and exchange. The anarcho-capitalist view on the state is that it should be abolished in favor of private security and arbitration. Egoism is the belief that individuals should act entirely according to their own self-interest, rejecting all moral and social constraints. The egoist view on rejection of the state is that the state is a constraint on individual will and must be rejected. The egoist view on liberty is that freedom is the absence of obligation beyond one's own desires. The egoist view on anarchy is order is that social agreements arise only when they benefit the individual. The egoist view on economic freedom is that individuals should take and use property solely for their own purposes. The egoist view on utopia is that a society of liberated individuals will act according to their own uniqueness. The egoist view on human nature is that people are fundamentally self-interested and driven by ego. The egoist view on the economy is that property is justified only through possession and use. The egoist view on society is that relationships should be temporary and based on self-benefit. The egoist view on the state is that it is a fiction that must be destroyed to allow pure individuality. There are 5 key thinkers for the anarchism ideology. These are Max Stirner, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Mikhail Bakunin, Peter Kropotkin, and Emma Goldman. The ideas of Max Stirner are that the self-interested and rational individual is the center of the moral universe and that the future society will be the union of egoists. The idea of the self-interested and rational individual is that the individual is the only rightful authority over their life and interests, above state and social constraints. The idea of the future society will be the union of egoists is that anarchy is order formed through voluntary, temporary associations driven by self-interest and brought about by insurrection rather than formal revolution. Max Stirner's view on rejection of the state is that the state must be rejected as it suppresses the individual ego. Max Stirner's view on liberty is that true liberty is the individual's power to act in their own interest without moral or social obligation. Max Stirner's view on anarchy is order is that natural order comes from voluntary egoistic unions rather than imposed authority. Max Stirner's view on economic freedom is that individuals should take what they need through their own power without property or regulation. Max Stirner's view on utopia is that a future egoist society is not a fixed ideal but a continuous assertion of individual will. Max Stirner's view on human nature is that individuals are self-interested, rational and driven by ego. Max Stirner's view on the economy is that economic relations should be based on individual appropriation and voluntary exchange. Max Stirner's view on society is that social arrangements should be temporary and dissolved when no longer beneficial to the individual. Max Stirner's view on the state is that it is a coercive fiction that must be dismantled by egoistic insurrection. The ideas of Pierre-Joseph Proudhon are opposition to private property and collectivism and the rejection and overthrow of the state. The idea of opposition to private property and collectivism is that private property limits liberty and economic freedom and should be replaced by mutualism. The idea of the rejection and overthrow of the state is that the state must be peacefully dismantled as it is unnecessary and oppressive. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on rejection of the state is that political authority should be replaced with voluntary contracts and mutual agreements. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on liberty is that freedom is achieved through self-management and fair economic exchange. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on anarchy is order is that social harmony arises naturally from mutual cooperation. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on economic freedom is that fair exchange and labor-based property promote justice. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on utopia is that a society based on mutualism will end exploitation and foster equality. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on human nature is that individuals are rational, cooperative and capable of self-management. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on the economy is that decentralized markets based on labor value create economic justice. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on society is that voluntary association leads to order and equality. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's view on the state is that it is an artificial construct that must be peacefully dismantled. The ideas of Mikhail Bakunin are propaganda by the deed and a strong belief in human sociability. The idea of propaganda by the deed is that revolution through direct action will abolish the state as all power is oppressive. The idea of strong belief in human sociability is that private property must be abolished and replaced with collectivization. Mikhail Bakunin's view on rejection of the state is that the state must be destroyed through revolutionary action. Mikhail Bakunin's view on liberty is that freedom comes through the collective liberation of all, not individual isolation. Mikhail Bakunin's view on anarchy is order is that natural social order arises from collective solidarity. Mikhail Bakunin's view on economic freedom is that economic life should be based on collectivism and equality. Mikhail Bakunin's view on utopia is that a stateless, collectivist society will enable full human development. Mikhail Bakunin's view on human nature is that people are naturally sociable and cooperative. Mikhail Bakunin's view on the economy is that collectivized ownership is the key to equality. Mikhail Bakunin's view on society is that social life should be based on mutual aid and solidarity. Mikhail Bakunin's view on the state is that it is inherently oppressive and must be abolished. The ideas of Peter Kropotkin are the scientific basis for mutual aid and revolution to abolish the state and private property. The idea of the scientific basis for mutual aid is that cooperation is natural to human beings and allows human nature to flourish. The idea of revolution to abolish the state and private property is that a future stateless, communal society will establish true order. Peter Kropotkin's view on rejection of the state is that the state suppresses natural cooperation and must be abolished. Peter Kropotkin's view on liberty is that true freedom is achieved through communal life and mutual aid. Peter Kropotkin's view on anarchy is order is that social order naturally arises from voluntary cooperation. Peter Kropotkin's view on economic freedom is that property should be held in common and distributed according to need. Peter Kropotkin's view on utopia is that a harmonious, cooperative society will be built on scientific understanding of human nature. Peter Kropotkin's view on human nature is that humans are instinctively cooperative and supportive. Peter Kropotkin's view on the economy is that it should function through communal ownership and mutual aid. Peter Kropotkin's view on society is that voluntary cooperation leads to harmony and equality. Peter Kropotkin's view on the state is that it is unnecessary and should be replaced by communal organization. The ideas of Emma Goldman are that the state is a cold monster and all forms of political participation in the state and society are corrupting and futile. The idea of the state is a cold monster is that the state should be rejected as it is immoral and oppressive. The idea of all forms of political participation in the state and society are corrupting and futile is that revolution, not reform, is the only path to liberation. Emma Goldman's view on rejection of the state is that the state destroys freedom and must be abolished. Emma Goldman's view on liberty is that freedom must be expressed in every aspect of human life without restraint. Emma Goldman's view on anarchy is order is that true social harmony arises from voluntary cooperation without authority. Emma Goldman's view on economic freedom is that capitalism must be replaced with communal ownership. Emma Goldman's view on utopia is that a stateless, classless society will enable true human flourishing. Emma Goldman's view on human nature is that individuals are capable of creativity and moral growth when free. Emma Goldman's view on the economy is that economic life should be based on equality and cooperation. Emma Goldman's view on society is that social relationships should be voluntary and based on mutual respect. Emma Goldman's view on the state is that it is a violent institution that must be overthrown. Ecologism is a reaction against the process of industrialization and urbanization. It promotes sustainability and believes that a fulfilling existence needs to be based on a radical altering of our relationship with non-human nature and our social and political life. The core ideas and principles of ecologism are that ecology, holism, environmental ethics, post-materialism, anti-consumerism and sustainability challenge dominant anthropocentric worldviews and call for a reorientation of the state, economy and society towards ecological balance. The idea of ecology is that all life forms exist within an interconnected web of relationships where the survival of each depends on the health of the whole ecosystem. The study of the relationship between living beings and the environment leads deep green ecologists to argue for a radical transformation of the state towards decentralization and ecological stewardship. The study of the relationship between living beings and the environment leads shallow green ecologists to support state intervention only where it protects human interests and economic stability. Based on the idea of ecology, ecologists view human nature as inherently interconnected with the natural world rather than superior to it. Based on the idea of ecology, ecologists view the economy as a subsystem of the environment that must operate within ecological limits. Based on the idea of ecology, ecologists view society as an ecological community that must live in harmony with other species. Based on the idea of ecology, ecologists view the state as responsible for protecting ecological systems as the foundation of life. The idea of holism is that the Earth functions as a single living system where all parts are interdependent and cannot be understood in isolation. The opposition to the mechanistic worldview of post-Enlightenment science asserts that the dominant view of the non-human world and economy as machines to be controlled leads to ecological destruction and alienation. Based on the idea of holism, ecologists view human nature as cooperative and relational, shaped by its embeddedness in the wider ecological whole. Based on the idea of holism, ecologists view the economy as an integrated part of the ecosystem rather than a separate sphere of human activity. Based on the idea of holism, ecologists view society as an organic community bound by interdependence with the natural world. Based on the idea of holism, ecologists view the state as a facilitator of ecological balance rather than a controller of nature. The idea of environmental ethics is that new moral standards must guide human relationships with each other and the non-human world to underpin ecological governance. The nature of ethics in ecologism is that morality must extend beyond humans to include animals, plants, and ecosystems as entities with intrinsic value. Based on the idea of environmental ethics, ecologists view human nature as morally responsible for protecting all forms of life. Based on the idea of environmental ethics, ecologists view the economy as subject to moral limits that prevent exploitation of the environment. Based on the idea of environmental ethics, ecologists view society as guided by ecological responsibility and respect for the non-human world. Based on the idea of environmental ethics, ecologists view the state as bound by moral duty to protect ecological integrity. The idea of environmental consciousness is that true self-realization comes when individuals identify deeply with nature. There needs to be a radical change in human nature and society to move from egoism and competition towards ecological awareness and cooperation. Based on the idea of environmental consciousness, ecologists view human nature as capable of spiritual and ecological awakening. Based on the idea of environmental consciousness, ecologists view the economy as a tool for ecological well-being rather than material gain. Based on the idea of environmental consciousness, ecologists view society as an extension of the natural world rather than a dominator over it. Based on the idea of environmental consciousness, ecologists view the state as a guardian of ecological awareness and harmony. The ideas of post-materialist and anti-consumerism are that human fulfillment is not achieved through material goods but through quality of life, community, and ecological balance. The criticisms of materialism argue that consumerism causes environmental degradation, alienates individuals, and undermines long-term well-being. The move beyond materialism is achieved through valuing simplicity, community, and ecological sustainability rather than economic growth. Based on post-materialist and anti-consumerism ideas, ecologists view human nature as capable of valuing well-being over consumption. Based on post-materialist and anti-consumerism ideas, ecologists view the economy as needing to prioritize ecological stability over profit. Based on post-materialist and anti-consumerism ideas, ecologists view society as enriched through non-material values and communal living. Based on post-materialist and anti-consumerism ideas, ecologists view the state as responsible for regulating consumption and promoting sustainable lifestyles. The idea of sustainability is that the ecological system must be preserved over time to maintain its capacity to support life. There is a need for sustainability because ecological degradation threatens long-term survival, requiring new economic models focused on renewable resources. The type of sustainability required is strong sustainability where natural capital cannot be substituted by human-made capital. The way of delivering sustainability is through long-term planning, regulation, and ecological stewardship. The implications for sustainability are that the state must enforce ecological limits, society must adopt sustainable lifestyles, and the economy must shift to circular production. Based on the idea of sustainability, ecologists view human nature as adaptable and capable of living within ecological limits. Based on the idea of sustainability, ecologists view the economy as needing to function within the regenerative capacity of ecosystems. Based on the idea of sustainability, ecologists view society as a participant in preserving ecological balance. Based on the idea of sustainability, ecologists view the state as the guardian of long-term ecological security. The different types of ecologism are deep green ecologism, shallow green ecologism, and social ecology. Deep green ecology is a radical ecocentric doctrine that emphasizes environmental consciousness, intrinsic value in nature, and strong sustainability as necessary for planetary survival. The deep green ecologist view on ecology is that nature is an interconnected whole with intrinsic value beyond human use. The deep green ecologist view on holism is that the Earth is a living system where humans are only one part of a wider ecological community. The deep green ecologist view on environmental ethics is that moral consideration must extend to all living and non-living entities. The deep green ecologist view on environmental consciousness is that human identity should be transformed through deep identification with nature. The deep green ecologist view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that human fulfillment comes from harmony with nature rather than material possessions. The deep green ecologist view on sustainability is that only strong sustainability can preserve the ecological system over time. The deep green ecologist view on human nature is that humans are capable of ecological enlightenment and must abandon anthropocentrism. The deep green ecologist view on the economy is that economic systems must be reorganized to operate entirely within ecological limits. The deep green ecologist view on society is that social values must be reshaped to reflect ecological balance and community. The deep green ecologist view on the state is that political structures must be fundamentally transformed to protect ecological integrity. Shallow green ecologism is a reformist stance based on enlightened anthropocentrism and weak sustainability aimed at preserving the environment for human benefit. The shallow green ecologist view on ecology is that nature must be protected because human well-being depends on it. The shallow green ecologist view on holism is that ecological interdependence matters but human needs remain central. The shallow green ecologist view on environmental ethics is that ethical concern for nature is justified primarily through its utility to humans. The shallow green ecologist view on environmental consciousness is that awareness of environmental issues is necessary to maintain human prosperity. The shallow green ecologist view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that excessive consumption must be curbed to ensure long-term human survival. The shallow green ecologist view on sustainability is that weak sustainability allows economic growth as long as environmental harm is mitigated. The shallow green ecologist view on human nature is that humans are rational and will protect nature when it aligns with their interests. The shallow green ecologist view on the economy is that the market can be guided through regulation and technology to achieve sustainability. The shallow green ecologist view on society is that social progress requires environmental protection alongside economic development. The shallow green ecologist view on the state is that government should implement environmental policies without radically transforming political structures. Social ecology holds that environmental degradation is caused by existing hierarchical social structures and sustainability can only be achieved through radical social change. Different types of social ecology are eco-socialism, eco-anarchism, and eco-feminism. Eco-socialism argues that capitalism causes ecological destruction, and environmental justice requires a socialist transformation. The eco-socialist view on ecology is that ecological balance can only be achieved through collective ownership and control of resources. The eco-socialist view on holism is that humans and nature form a single system oppressed by capitalist exploitation. The eco-socialist view on environmental ethics is that protecting nature is a moral duty arising from the need to overcome capitalist domination. The eco-socialist view on environmental consciousness is that awareness of ecological justice arises from class struggle and collective action. The eco-socialist view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that consumerism is a capitalist tool that must be replaced with collective well-being. The eco-socialist view on sustainability is that only socialist planning can guarantee strong sustainability. The eco-socialist view on human nature is that humans are cooperative and best flourish in communal ecological societies. The eco-socialist view on the economy is that production should be democratically planned to meet ecological and social needs. The eco-socialist view on society is that equality and environmental protection are interconnected goals. The eco-socialist view on the state is that it should be transformed into a democratic ecological state serving the collective interest. Eco-anarchism holds that ecological degradation is rooted in hierarchy and can only be solved by dismantling the state. The eco-anarchist view on ecology is that ecosystems thrive without centralized control just as human societies should. The eco-anarchist view on holism is that decentralized communities live in balance with the wider ecological whole. The eco-anarchist view on environmental ethics is that all forms of domination, including domination of nature, are morally wrong. The eco-anarchist view on environmental consciousness is that humans must reject authority to reconnect with nature. The eco-anarchist view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that consumerism is a form of social control that must be replaced with simple communal living. The eco-anarchist view on sustainability is that only decentralized self-sufficient communities can maintain ecological balance. The eco-anarchist view on human nature is that humans are naturally cooperative when freed from hierarchical structures. The eco-anarchist view on the economy is that it should be based on local self-management and ecological subsistence. The eco-anarchist view on society is that hierarchical systems must be replaced with voluntary ecological communities. The eco-anarchist view on the state is that it must be abolished to allow true ecological harmony. Ecofeminism argues that the domination of nature is linked to the domination of women and both must be ended to achieve sustainability. The ecofeminist view on ecology is that ecosystems are living communities harmed by patriarchal exploitation. The ecofeminist view on holism is that humans are part of a nurturing web of life that must be respected. The ecofeminist view on environmental ethics is that moral concern must extend to all beings through principles of care and reciprocity. The ecofeminist view on environmental consciousness is that reconnecting with nature requires embracing feminine values of empathy and nurturance. The ecofeminist view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that materialism is a patriarchal construct that must be replaced with values of care and ecological well-being. The ecofeminist view on sustainability is that sustainability depends on dismantling patriarchal systems that prioritize domination over care. The ecofeminist view on human nature is that human beings are caring and cooperative when freed from patriarchal conditioning. The ecofeminist view on the economy is that it should be based on ecological care work and communal responsibility. The ecofeminist view on society is that social structures should promote equality, care, and environmental harmony. The ecofeminist view on the state is that patriarchal power must be dismantled to create an ecological and just society. There are 5 key thinkers for ecologism: Aldo Leopold, Rachel Carson, E. F. Schumacher, Mary Bookchin, and Carolyn Marchant. Aldo Leopold's ideas are that the land ethic must extend moral consideration to the non-human world and that conservation fails when it is based on economic self-interest rather than ecological responsibility. The idea of the land ethic is that humans are members of a wider biotic community and must preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the natural world. The idea of conservation fails is that conservation cannot succeed if it remains within an economic framework that treats nature as a resource rather than a community to which humans belong. Aldo Leopold's view on ecology is that all living beings exist within a complex web of interdependence where ecological health determines human survival. Aldo Leopold's view on holism is that nature functions as an integrated system where the well-being of each part relies on the health of the whole. Aldo Leopold's view on environmental ethics is that morality must guide human interactions with the land to ensure ecological harmony and prevent degradation. Aldo Leopold's view on environmental consciousness is that humans must develop a deep ecological awareness that recognizes nature's intrinsic value. Aldo Leopold's view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that human fulfillment should come from living in balance with nature rather than exploiting it for economic gain. Aldo Leopold's view on sustainability is that long-term ecological stewardship is essential for maintaining the biotic community. Aldo Leopold's view on human nature is that humans are capable of moral growth and can choose to act as responsible members of the ecological community. Aldo Leopold's view on the economy is that economic systems must be subordinate to ecological limits. Aldo Leopold's view on society is that communities should be organized around ecological responsibility and land stewardship. Aldo Leopold's view on the state is that government policies should be based on ecological principles rather than economic exploitation. Rachel Carson's ideas are that the state and society do not have the authority to dominate nature and that nature should be seen holistically as a living system rather than a resource for human exploitation. The idea that the state and society do not have the authority to dominate nature is that the use of chemical pesticides causes long-term ecological damage that threatens human and non-human life. The idea that nature should be seen holistically is that nature does not exist for human convenience but as a complex living system with its own intrinsic value. Rachel Carson's view on ecology is that human survival is dependent on the health of ecosystems which must be protected from industrial exploitation. Rachel Carson's view on holism is that the natural world is interconnected and any harm to one part affects the whole system. Rachel Carson's view on environmental ethics is that humans have a moral duty to protect the natural world from unnecessary harm. Rachel Carson's view on environmental consciousness is that awareness of ecological consequences must shape human behavior. Rachel Carson's view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that the pursuit of economic growth must be rejected when it destroys ecological health. Rachel Carson's view on sustainability is that long-term ecological stability is essential for the survival of life on Earth. Rachel Carson's view on human nature is that humans are capable of recognizing their ecological responsibility. Rachel Carson's view on the economy is that economic activity must be restrained to prevent ecological destruction. Rachel Carson's view on society is that social values must shift from domination to preservation of nature. Rachel Carson's view on the state is that governments must regulate harmful industrial practices to protect ecological systems. E. F. Schumacher's ideas are that Buddhist economics places human well-being above consumption, while traditional economics is based on the false belief that material goods are more important than people and creativity. The idea of Buddhist economics is that the purpose of economic life is to maximize well-being with minimum consumption in harmony with nature. The idea of traditional economics is that it wrongly prioritizes material wealth over human dignity and ecological health. E. F. Schumacher's view on ecology is that economic systems must align with ecological principles. E. F. Schumacher's view on holism is that human economic life is inseparable from the natural environment. E. F. Schumacher's view on environmental ethics is that economic decisions must be guided by moral responsibility towards the earth. E. F. Schumacher's view on environmental consciousness is that humans should recognize the spiritual and ecological dimensions of life. E. F. Schumacher's view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that true prosperity comes from simplicity and meaningful work rather than consumption. E. F. Schumacher's view on sustainability is that economies must be based on renewable resources and long-term ecological balance. E. F. Schumacher's view on human nature is that humans seek meaningful, creative activity rather than endless consumption. E. F. Schumacher's view on the economy is that small-scale, local economies are the most sustainable and humane. E. F. Schumacher's view on society is that social structures should promote community, well-being, and ecological harmony. E. F. Schumacher's view on the state is that government should support sustainable, decentralized economic systems. Murray Bookchin's ideas are that the environmental crisis is caused by oppressive social structures and that lessons from ecology show that future societies should be decentralized and self-sufficient. The idea that the environmental crisis emerges from existing social structures of oppression is that hierarchical systems must be dismantled to restore ecological balance. The idea that lessons should be learned from ecology is that societies must be organized as decentralized, self-sufficient communes in harmony with natural systems. Murray Bookchin's view on ecology is that ecological health depends on the transformation of social structures. Murray Bookchin's view on holism is that society and nature are parts of the same organic whole. Murray Bookchin's view on environmental ethics is that domination of nature stems from domination of human beings and must be rejected. Murray Bookchin's view on environmental consciousness is that ecological awareness emerges from social liberation. Murray Bookchin's view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that consumerism is a product of oppressive systems that must be replaced with cooperative living. Murray Bookchin's view on sustainability is that sustainability requires a radical restructuring of social and political systems. Murray Bookchin's view on human nature is that humans are naturally cooperative and capable of living in harmony when freed from oppressive hierarchies. Murray Bookchin's view on the economy is that production should be decentralized and community-based. Murray Bookchin's view on society is that only egalitarian, communal societies can achieve ecological harmony. Murray Bookchin's view on the state is that hierarchical state power must be dismantled and replaced with local ecological governance. Carolyn Merchant's ideas are that the oppression of nature is linked to the oppression of women and that opposition to the mechanistic male view of science is necessary to restore ecological balance. The idea that the oppression and death of nature are linked to gender oppression is that ecological survival requires radical restructuring of gender relations based on care and equality. The idea of opposition to the mechanistic male view of science and nature is that reductionist science dominates society and must be replaced with a holistic, relational worldview. Carolyn Merchant's view on ecology is that nature is a living entity that must be respected and protected. Carolyn Merchant's view on holism is that ecological and social systems are interdependent and should be approached as integrated wholes. Carolyn Merchant's view on environmental ethics is that moral responsibility must extend to both nature and oppressed human groups. Carolyn Merchant's view on environmental consciousness is that society must develop a nurturing, relational understanding of the natural world. Carolyn Merchant's view on post-materialist and anti-consumerism is that patriarchal consumerism must be replaced with values of care, sustainability, and equality. Carolyn Merchant's view on sustainability is that true sustainability can only be achieved by dismantling systems of domination over both women and nature. Carolyn Merchant's view on human nature is that humans are capable of cooperation and care when liberated from patriarchal norms. Carolyn Merchant's view on the economy is that it should be restructured around ecological care and gender equality. Carolyn Merchant's view on society is that social institutions must promote equality, justice, and ecological harmony. Carolyn Merchant's view on the state is that hierarchical and patriarchal state structures must be transformed to support ecological and social justice. Feminism is an ideology based on the belief that society is characterized by unequal gender power and status. All forms of feminism are committed to advancing the social role of women, ensuring that the disadvantages they face can and should be overthrown. The core ideas and principles of feminism are based on the belief that society is shaped by the interaction of sex and gender, the existence of patriarchy, the idea that the personal is political, and the distinction between equality and difference feminism, as well as the recognition of intersectionality. Sex and gender refer to the difference where sex is a biological distinction between men and women, whereas gender represents the roles and behaviors that society attributes to them. Feminists believe this distinction is important in their analysis of society because it reveals that gender roles are socially constructed rather than biologically determined, reinforcing unequal power structures. Based on the ideas of sex and gender, the feminist view on human nature is that it is shaped by social conditioning rather than biology. Based on the ideas of sex and gender, the feminist view on the economy is that it is organized in a way that reflects and reinforces gender inequalities. Based on the ideas of sex and gender, the feminist view on society is that it perpetuates inequality through cultural expectations and gender norms. Based on the ideas of sex and gender, the feminist view on the state is that it upholds patriarchal values through laws and institutions. The idea of patriarchy is that society, the state, and the economy are characterized by systematic, institutionalized, and pervasive gender oppression. Patriarchy is understood differently by feminists, where radical feminists see it as the root of all oppression, socialist feminists link it to capitalism, and liberal feminists regard it as sustained by unequal laws and cultural attitudes. Based on the ideas of patriarchy, the feminist view on human nature is that it is capable of both dominance and equality depending on social structures. Based on the ideas of patriarchy, the feminist view on the economy is that it reinforces male privilege through control of resources and labor. Based on the ideas of patriarchy, the feminist view on society is that it is structured to maintain male dominance and female subordination. Based on the ideas of patriarchy, the feminist view on the state is that it acts as an instrument that upholds and legitimizes patriarchal power. The idea of the personal is political means that all relationships in both public and private life between men and women are rooted in power and dominance. Feminists think this goes to the essence of patriarchy because it exposes how private life reproduces social oppression. Some feminists believe this distinction is crucial for liberation because it challenges the separation between public and private spheres, while others see it as dangerous because it risks undermining individual privacy. Based on the ideas of the personal is political, the feminist view on human nature is that it is influenced by power dynamics and shaped by social relationships. Based on the ideas of the personal is political, the feminist view on the economy is that it reproduces gendered power hierarchies through labor and domestic roles. Based on the ideas of the personal is political, the feminist view on society is that it perpetuates inequality through personal and intimate relationships. Based on the ideas of the personal is political, the feminist view on the state is that it is complicit in maintaining gendered power structures. Equality feminism seeks equality for men and women in society, whereas difference feminism argues that men and women have fundamentally different natures that should both be valued. The core difference between these two types of feminism is that equality feminists stress sameness and equal treatment, while difference feminists emphasize celebrating women's distinct characteristics, a division that significantly shapes feminist strategies and goals. Based on the ideas of equality feminism and difference feminism, the feminist view on human nature is that it is either essentially similar across genders or distinct but equally valuable. Based on the ideas of equality feminism and difference feminism, the feminist view on the economy is that it should either offer equal opportunities or recognize different contributions from men and women. Based on the ideas of equality feminism and difference feminism, the feminist view on society is that it should either integrate men and women equally or revalue feminine traits that have been devalued. Based on the ideas of equality feminism and difference feminism, the feminist view on the state is that it should either reform institutions to ensure equality or transform them to reflect women's perspectives. The idea of intersectionality argues that black and working-class women's experiences of patriarchy in the state, society, and the economy differ from those of white, middle-class women. This newer strand of feminism has broadened feminist thinking by highlighting how gender intersects with race, class, and other identities, making feminism more inclusive and socially aware. Based on the idea of intersectionality, the feminist view on human nature is that it is diverse and shaped by overlapping social identities. Based on the idea of intersectionality, the feminist view on the economy is that it is structured by both gender and class inequalities. Based on the idea of intersectionality, the feminist view on society is that it operates through multiple intersecting systems of oppression. Based on the idea of intersectionality, the feminist view on the state is that it reproduces various forms of inequality through its policies and institutions. The different types of feminism are liberal feminism, socialist feminism, radical feminism, and postmodern feminism. Liberal feminism is a strand of feminism that sees individualism as the basis of gender equality. The liberal feminist view on sex and gender is that gender differences are socially constructed and can be changed through education and reform. The liberal feminist view on patriarchy is that it exists through discriminatory laws and outdated social attitudes rather than being a fundamental structure of society. The liberal feminist view on the personal is political is that private inequality can be challenged through public policy and legal reform. The liberal feminist view on equality feminism and difference feminism is that equality should be achieved by removing barriers that prevent women from having the same rights and opportunities as men. The liberal feminist view on intersectionality is that all women should have equal legal and social rights regardless of race, class, or background. The liberal feminist view on human nature is that men and women are rational individuals capable of self-determination. The liberal feminist view on the economy is that women should have equal access to employment, pay, and career advancement. The liberal feminist view on society is that social progress can be achieved through education, reform, and changing attitudes. The liberal feminist view on the state is that it should act as a neutral arbiter ensuring fairness, equality, and legal protection for women. Socialist feminism is a strand of feminism that believes gender inequality stems from economics and that capitalism creates patriarchy. The socialist feminist view on sex and gender is that gender roles are created by economic systems that exploit women's unpaid and underpaid labor. The socialist feminist view on patriarchy is that it is deeply intertwined with capitalism, where both systems work together to maintain male and class dominance. The socialist feminist view on the personal is political is that domestic life and unpaid housework reflect broader capitalist exploitation. The socialist feminist view on socialist feminism and difference feminism is that liberation requires collective action to dismantle both class and gender oppression rather than focusing on biological difference. The socialist feminist view on intersectionality is that gender oppression cannot be understood without also analyzing class and economic inequality. The socialist feminist view on human nature is that humans are social beings whose behavior is shaped by economic and material conditions. The socialist feminist view on the economy is that capitalism must be replaced or transformed to eliminate gender inequality. The socialist feminist view on society is that class and gender hierarchies must be dismantled to achieve equality. The socialist feminist view on the state is that it currently serves capitalist and patriarchal interests and must be restructured to support social equality. Radical feminism is a strand of feminism that believes the biggest problem facing society is gender inequality. The radical feminist view on sex and gender is that gender is the root of women's oppression and must be abolished entirely. The radical feminist view on patriarchy is that it is the most fundamental and universal form of oppression that shapes all aspects of life. The radical feminist view on the personal is political is that male dominance extends into every personal relationship and must be challenged at its roots. The radical feminist view on radical feminism and difference feminism is that women's unique qualities should be celebrated as a source of strength and solidarity against patriarchy. The radical feminist view on intersectionality is that different forms of oppression interact but all stem from patriarchal structures of power. The radical feminist view on human nature is that men have been conditioned to dominate while women have been socialized to submit. The radical feminist view on the economy is that it is built on the exploitation of women's reproductive and domestic labor. The radical feminist view on society is that it must undergo a complete cultural revolution to eradicate male dominance. The radical feminist view on the state is that it upholds patriarchal interests and cannot be relied upon to achieve genuine liberation. Postmodern feminism is a strand of feminism that argues patriarchy manifests in different ways depending on a woman's race, class, and other identities. The postmodern feminist view on sex and gender is that both are fluid and socially constructed categories rather than fixed biological truths. The postmodern feminist view on patriarchy is that it operates differently across cultures and contexts and cannot be understood as a single universal system. The postmodern feminist view on the personal is political is that individual experiences reveal how power and identity are shaped by multiple factors. The postmodern feminist view on equality feminism and difference feminism is that neither approach fully captures the complexity of women's diverse identities and experiences. The postmodern feminist view on intersectionality is that it is essential for understanding how gender oppression overlaps with race, class, sexuality, and culture. The postmodern feminist view on human nature is that identity is fragmented, socially constructed, and constantly changing. The postmodern feminist view on the economy is that economic systems shape gender roles differently across societies and identities. The postmodern feminist view on society is that it is made up of diverse power structures that cannot be explained by a single theory of oppression. The postmodern feminist view on the state is that it reflects dominant discourses and should be challenged through cultural and linguistic change. The key feminist thinkers are Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Simone de Beauvoir, Kate Millett, Sheila Robotham, and Bell Hooks. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's ideas focus on the link between sex and domestic economics and the societal pressure placed upon women. The idea of sex and domestic economics are hand in hand means that for women to survive, they have to depend on their sexuality and body in order to please their husbands. The idea of societal pressure means that young girls are compelled to conform in society and prepare for motherhood by playing with toys and wearing clothes that are specifically designed for and marketed to them. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on sex and gender is that women's subordination is socially constructed through economic dependence rather than biological difference. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on patriarchy is that it is sustained through economic structures that force women into domestic roles. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on the personal is political is that the private household is a site of women's oppression that reflects wider social inequality. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on equality feminism and difference feminism is that women should be freed from economic dependence to achieve equality rather than emphasizing natural differences. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on intersectionality is that while her focus was primarily on gender, she recognized how economic structures shape women's varied experiences. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on human nature is that men and women are both rational beings capable of equal contribution when freed from restrictive roles. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on the economy is that women must gain financial independence through paid work to break the cycle of subordination. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on society is that true progress depends on restructuring domestic life and recognizing women's labor. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's view on the state is that it should promote social reform to ensure women's equality and economic freedom. Simone de Beauvoir's ideas center on the distinction between sex and gender and the concept of otherness. The idea of sex versus gender is that one is not born, but rather becomes, a woman, meaning that womanhood is shaped by social conditioning rather than biology. The idea of otherness means that men are perceived as the normal while women are seen as deviants from this norm. Simone de Beauvoir's view on sex and gender is that gender is an artificial social category used to confine women to secondary roles. Simone de Beauvoir's view on patriarchy is that it is rooted in men defining themselves as superior and women as the other. Simone de Beauvoir's view on the personal is political is that women's subordination within relationships mirrors their oppression in society. Simone de Beauvoir's view on equality feminism and difference feminism is that women's liberation comes from transcending traditional gender roles rather than celebrating difference. Simone de Beauvoir's view on intersectionality is that while she did not use the term, her analysis inspired later feminists to consider how identity and experience intersect. Simone de Beauvoir's view on human nature is that humans have the freedom to define themselves beyond imposed identities. Simone de Beauvoir's view on the economy is that it should provide equal access for women to pursue careers and independence. Simone de Beauvoir's view on society is that cultural norms must be challenged to allow women full existential freedom. Simone de Beauvoir's view on the state is that it should remove legal and institutional barriers that reinforce gender inequality. Kate Millett's ideas focus on the role of the family and the portrayal of women in art and literature. The idea of family is that undoing the traditional family was the key to achieving a true sexual revolution. The idea of portrayal of women in art and literature is that patriarchal culture has produced writers and literary works that degrade women and normalize male dominance. Kate Millett's view on sex and gender is that gender is a political construct used to maintain male supremacy. Kate Millett's view on patriarchy is that it operates through both social institutions and cultural representation. Kate Millett's view on the personal is political is that personal relationships are sites of political struggle where men exert power over women. Kate Millett's view on equality feminism and difference feminism is that equality requires dismantling cultural and psychological systems that reinforce difference. Kate Millett's view on intersectionality is that patriarchy intersects with other hierarchies, though her main focus was on gender relations. Kate Millett's view on human nature is that gender inequality is socially taught rather than inherent. Kate Millett's view on the economy is that economic independence is essential for dismantling patriarchal control. Kate Millett's view on society is that cultural change is as important as political reform in achieving liberation. Kate Millett's view on the state is that it should reform laws and policies to end gender-based oppression. Sheila Robotham's ideas center on capitalism and the family. The idea of capitalism is that women are forced to sell their labor to survive and support their families under the capitalist system. The idea of the family is that it not only disciplines and subjugates women to capitalism but also serves as a refuge for men from alienation under a capitalist economy. Sheila Robotham's view on sex and gender is that gender inequality is rooted in a capitalist system that exploits women's domestic and wage labor. Sheila Robotham's view on patriarchy is that it is reinforced and sustained by capitalism. Sheila Robotham's view on the personal is political is that domestic life mirrors the exploitation found in the wider economy. Sheila Robotham's view on equality feminism and difference feminism is that equality can only be achieved by transforming both gender and class relations. Sheila Robotham's view on intersectionality is that gender oppression must be understood in relation to economic class and material conditions. Sheila Robotham's view on human nature is that humans are shaped by material and social structures that can be changed through collective struggle. Sheila Robotham's view on the economy is that capitalism must be overthrown to achieve true gender equality. Sheila Robotham's view on society is that both cultural and economic systems must be transformed to liberate women. Sheila Robotham's view on the state is that it currently upholds capitalist and patriarchal interests and must be reformed to serve equality. Bell Hook's ideas focus on women of color and intersectionality. The idea of women of color is that she brought the cultural concerns of women of color into the mainstream feminist movement. The idea of intersectionality is that the mainstream feminist movement had focused mostly on the plight of white, middle-class women and neglected the experiences of women of color. Bell Hook's view on sex and gender is that both concepts must be understood alongside race and class to reveal the full nature of oppression. Bell Hook's view on patriarchy is that it intersects with racism and capitalism to create multiple layers of domination. Bell Hook's view on the personal is political is that private and public experiences of oppression are shaped by intersecting social identities. Bell Hook's view on equality feminism and difference feminism is that feminism must embrace diversity and reject universal assumptions about women's experiences. Bell Hook's view on intersectionality is that it is central to understanding the complexity of women's struggles across race, class, and culture. Bell Hook's view on human nature is that people have the capacity for love, understanding, and transformation through awareness of oppression. Bell Hook's view on the economy is that capitalism perpetuates inequality that disproportionately affects women of color. Bell Hook's view on society is that it must confront racism, sexism, and classism together to achieve genuine equality. Bell Hook's view on the state is that it has historically reinforced systems of oppression but has the potential to promote justice through inclusive reform. Multiculturalism is concerned with the best way to respond to cultural and religious diversity and how to balance this diversity with civic unity. It focuses on the political accommodation of difference and how to integrate differing identities into an overarching, collective identity. The core ideas and principles of multiculturalism are rooted in the politics of recognition, the importance of culture and identity, the protection of minority rights, and the celebration of diversity. The idea of politics of recognition is the positive endorsement and celebration of cultural differences, valuing every culture as worthy of respect and inclusion. Oppression and cultural marginalization affect human nature by damaging individuals' sense of self-worth and belonging, leading to alienation and social division. Recognition is crucial for the human sense of self because it validates identity, fosters dignity, and underpins social integration and cohesion. Based on the idea of politics of recognition, the multiculturalist view on human nature is that individuals are shaped by their cultural identities and require social acknowledgement to flourish. Based on the idea of politics of recognition, the multiculturalist view on the economy is that inclusion of diverse cultural groups strengthens creativity, innovation, and equality of opportunity. Based on the idea of politics of recognition, the multiculturalist view on society is that it should be inclusive, respectful, and pluralistic, allowing every group to maintain its cultural distinctiveness. Based on the idea of politics of recognition, the multiculturalist view on the state is that it must actively protect and promote recognition of all cultural identities to ensure justice and equality. The idea of culture and identity is that culture shapes how individuals understand themselves, their relationships, and their place within society. Culture is critical to human nature and society because it forms the foundation of personal, political, and social identity, guiding values, behavior, and belonging. Minority cultures should be protected to preserve diversity, prevent assimilation, and ensure that all citizens can live according to their cultural traditions and beliefs. Criticisms of favoring minority cultures argue that it may create division, inequality, or undermine shared national identity. Based on the idea of culture and identity, the multiculturalist view on human nature is that individuals are culturally embedded beings whose identity cannot be separated from their cultural background. Based on the idea of culture and identity, the multiculturalist view on the economy is that it must accommodate cultural differences and promote equal participation across diverse groups. Based on the idea of culture and identity, the multiculturalist view on society is that social harmony depends on the recognition and coexistence of different cultural communities. Based on the idea of culture and identity, the multiculturalist view on the state is that it should uphold cultural pluralism and safeguard cultural expression through law and policy. The idea of minority rights is that certain groups require special legal and political protections to maintain their culture and achieve genuine equality. The state should address the specific needs of particular groups by granting special rights that recognize their cultural, linguistic, or religious distinctiveness, promoting fairness and inclusion. The state can address these needs through measures such as affirmative action, language rights, and community self-governance to reduce structural inequality. Criticisms of minority rights claim they may privilege certain groups, weaken social unity, or conflict with liberal ideas of individual equality. Based on the idea of minority rights, the multiculturalist view on human nature is that people are social and cultural beings who thrive when their identities are recognized and supported. Based on the idea of minority rights, the multiculturalist view on the economy is that equitable development requires acknowledging and addressing the structural disadvantages faced by minority groups. Based on the idea of minority rights, the multiculturalist view on society is that inclusion and justice depend on the empowerment and recognition of all cultural communities. Based on the idea of minority rights, the multiculturalist view on the state is that it must balance universal equality with the protection of group-specific rights. The idea of diversity is that including different races and cultures in the state, society, and economy is both possible and positive, and should be celebrated as a strength. Different justifications for diversity include moral arguments for equality, social arguments for cohesion, and economic arguments for innovation and progress. Different types of diversity include racial, cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity, each contributing to the richness of collective identity. Criticisms of diversity claim it may cause cultural fragmentation, reduce social solidarity, or challenge common values. Based on the idea of diversity, the multiculturalist view on human nature is that individuals are enriched through interaction with different cultures and perspectives. Based on the idea of diversity, the multiculturalist view on the economy is that cultural variety enhances productivity, creativity, and adaptability in a globalized world. Based on the idea of diversity, the multiculturalist view on society is that pluralism promotes mutual understanding, tolerance, and a stronger sense of shared humanity. Based on the idea of diversity, the multiculturalist view on the state is that it should promote inclusion and celebrate difference as essential to democratic life. The different types of multiculturalism are liberal multiculturalism, pluralist multiculturalism, cosmopolitan multiculturalism, and the conservative criticism. Liberal multiculturalism is a broad ideology that endorses cultural diversity, is compatible with tolerance and personal autonomy within a liberal framework, and promotes civic unity in the public sphere. The liberal multiculturalist view on human nature is that individuals are rational and autonomous beings who should have the freedom to express their cultural identity. The liberal multiculturalist view on the economy is that equality of opportunity allows all cultural groups to participate and prosper within a fair market system. The liberal multiculturalist view on society is that diversity should exist within a shared framework of liberal values that unite citizens through common rights and responsibilities. The liberal multiculturalist view on the state is that it should remain neutral between cultures while protecting individual freedoms and ensuring non-discrimination. The liberal multiculturalist view on politics of recognition is that recognition should focus on individual autonomy and equality rather than collective identity. The liberal multiculturalist view on culture and identity is that culture should be freely chosen and not imposed, allowing individuals to define their own sense of belonging. The liberal multiculturalist view on minority rights is that such rights are justified only when they support individual freedom and do not restrict autonomy. The liberal multiculturalist view on diversity is that it enriches society as long as it aligns with the principles of liberty and equality. Pluralist multiculturalism is a broad ideology where diversity is a value in its own right, all cultures are equal, and cultural recognition is the basis for civic participation. The pluralist multiculturalist view on human nature is that people are culturally embedded beings whose identities are shaped by the communities to which they belong. The pluralist multiculturalist view on the economy is that economic systems should respect cultural differences and ensure fair access for all cultural groups. The pluralist multiculturalist view on society is that it should consist of multiple cultural communities coexisting equally, each contributing to collective life. The pluralist multiculturalist view on the state is that it should promote and protect the autonomy of cultural groups within a shared political framework. The pluralist multiculturalist view on politics of recognition is that every culture deserves equal respect and public acknowledgement as a foundation for inclusion. The pluralist multiculturalist view on culture and identity is that cultural identity is central to personal and social meaning and must be preserved to sustain human dignity. The pluralist multiculturalist view on minority rights is that they are necessary to protect distinct cultural practices and prevent marginalization. The pluralist multiculturalist view on diversity is that it is inherently valuable and essential for a vibrant and just society. Cosmopolitan multiculturalism is the belief that diversity strengthens cultural hybridity, promotes global citizenship, and undermines cultural identity as a driving force in society. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on human nature is that individuals are global citizens whose identities are fluid and formed through cultural exchange. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on the economy is that global interconnectedness fosters innovation, cooperation, and shared prosperity across cultural boundaries. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on society is that it should be open and dynamic, where cultural blending leads to greater understanding and progress. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on the state is that it should embrace global values, encourage cross-cultural dialogue, and support international cooperation. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on politics of recognition is that recognition should focus on shared humanity rather than fixed cultural identities. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on culture and identity is that identity is flexible, evolving through interaction and exchange between different cultures. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on minority rights is that cultural protection should promote integration and mutual learning rather than isolation. The cosmopolitan multiculturalist view on diversity is that it is a source of global enrichment and the foundation for a more interconnected world. The conservative criticism is that there can be no diversity within unity, as excessive cultural difference undermines shared values and social cohesion. The conservative critic's view on human nature is that people require a stable cultural identity rooted in tradition and continuity. The conservative critic's view on the economy is that a shared moral framework is necessary to sustain trust, order, and productivity. The conservative critic's view on society is that unity and common culture are essential for social stability and national identity. The conservative critic's view on the state is that it should preserve traditional values and protect national cohesion against cultural fragmentation. The conservative critic's view on politics of recognition is that prioritizing cultural difference over shared values erodes social harmony. The conservative critic's view on culture and identity is that culture should unite citizens under a common heritage rather than divide them into separate groups. The conservative critic's view on minority rights is that granting special rights threatens equality and weakens national unity. The conservative critic's view on diversity is that it can create division and conflict unless grounded in a strong and cohesive cultural framework. The multiculturalist key thinkers are Isaiah Berlin, Charles Taylor, Baiku Parekh, Parikh Modud, and Will Kimlicka. The idea of Isaiah Berlin is value pluralism. The idea of value pluralism is that liberal views in society hold no more moral authority than illiberal beliefs, so the state and society need to move beyond shallow diversity. The view that pluralism should only be in a liberal society means that genuine value pluralism can only exist where liberty and mutual respect are protected. Isaiah Berlin's view on human nature is that individuals are guided by a variety of equally valid moral values that cannot be fully reconciled. Isaiah Berlin's view on the economy is that it should allow people to pursue different conceptions of the good life without state interference. Isaiah Berlin's view on society is that it should accept moral diversity and allow multiple ways of living to coexist peacefully. Isaiah Berlin's view on the state is that it must protect freedom by ensuring individuals can choose between competing values without coercion. Isaiah Berlin's view on politics of recognition is that respect for differing values requires tolerance of both liberal and illiberal cultures. Isaiah Berlin's view on culture and identity is that every culture embodies distinct moral visions that deserve acknowledgement. Isaiah Berlin's view on minority rights is that protecting diversity safeguards freedom and prevents cultural domination. Isaiah Berlin's view on diversity is that it is an inevitable and enriching feature of human existence that must be respected. The idea of Charles Taylor is the politics of recognition. The idea of the politics of recognition is based on the universal right for all to have their identity recognized. The idea of politics of recognition is based on the equalization of all rights and entitlements and the politics of difference, ensuring every identity is valued and affirmed. Charles Taylor's view on human nature is that individuals need recognition from others to develop a secure sense of self. Charles Taylor's view on the economy is that economic participation should reflect and respect cultural differences. Charles Taylor's view on society is that mutual recognition strengthens social cohesion and prevents alienation. Charles Taylor's view on the state is that it should promote equal recognition and protect cultural expression through inclusive policies. Charles Taylor's view on politics of recognition is that recognition of cultural identity is essential for individual dignity and equality. Charles Taylor's view on culture and identity is that identity is formed through dialogue and acknowledgement within a cultural context. Charles Taylor's view on minority rights is that they are vital to ensure all groups receive equal respect and participation. Charles Taylor's view on diversity is that it enriches society by fostering understanding and inclusion. The ideas of Baiku Parekh are the rejection of universalist liberalism, the justifications for minority rights, and deep diversity. The idea of rejection of universalist liberalism is the belief in the importance of the individual being culturally embedded. The justifications for minority rights and deep diversity are that cross-cultural dialogue can be transformative for majority and minority cultures, creating common citizenship. Baiku Parekh's view on human nature is that people are shaped by their culture and develop moral values through cultural belonging. Baiku Parekh's view on the economy is that it should recognize cultural difference and distribute resources fairly among all communities. Baiku Parekh's view on society is that deep diversity strengthens democracy by promoting dialogue and shared understanding. Baiku Parekh's view on the state is that it should mediate between cultures, ensuring that no culture dominates another. Baiku Parekh's view on politics of recognition is that recognition must involve intercultural dialogue and not just passive tolerance. Baiku Parekh's view on culture and identity is that each culture offers unique insights and moral visions that enrich human life. Baiku Parekh's view on minority rights is that they are essential to achieve justice and equality between cultures. Baiku Parekh's view on diversity is that it is a fundamental characteristic of human society that must be valued and protected. The ideas of Tariq Modood are that strong cultural identities are a good thing and that all for views of integration may be valid. The idea that strong cultural identities are a good thing means they need the complement of a vibrant national narrative that emerges from debate between cultures. The four views of integration are assimilation, individualist, multiculturalism, and cosmopolitanism. Assimilation emphasizes adopting the dominant culture, individualist integration stresses personal choice over group identity, multiculturalism promotes coexistence of distinct cultures, cosmopolitanism supports global identity beyond national boundaries. The idea that all four views of integration may be valid means they are acceptable provided they are the preferred choice of the individual or group and not imposed by the state or society. Tariq Modood's view on human nature is that people identify strongly with their culture and seek recognition within it. Tariq Modood's view on the economy is that it should accommodate cultural diversity and create equal opportunities for all groups. Tariq Modood's view on society is that it should balance shared citizenship with respect for distinct cultural identities. Tariq Modood's view on the state is that it should promote dialogue between cultures to create an inclusive national identity. Tariq Modood's view on politics of recognition is that recognition must include both cultural respect and civic participation. Tariq Modood's view on culture and identity is that cultural identity is dynamic and should contribute to shaping the national narrative. Tariq Modood's view on minority rights is that they are necessary to protect identity and ensure genuine inclusion in national life. Tariq Modood's view on diversity is that it strengthens democracy and enriches social and cultural development. The idea of Wilkimlika is group differentiated rights. The idea of group differentiated rights is that they are provided by the state, including self-government rights, polyethnic rights, and representation rights. The justification for these rights is that the state should provide them to ensure full and equal participation for, and integration of, all cultures. Wilkimlika's view on human nature is that individuals are shaped by their cultural membership, which provides meaning and identity. Wilkimlika's view on the economy is that it must guarantee equality of access for all cultural groups and prevent structural disadvantage. Wilkimlika's view on society is that it should recognize the importance of culture in allowing citizens to participate equally. Wilkimlika's view on the state is that it must actively protect cultural groups through differentiated rights to achieve true equality. Wilkimlika's view on politics of recognition is that recognition must take legal form to empower cultural groups. Wilkimlika's view on culture and identity is that cultural belonging is essential to individual freedom and political participation. Wilkimlika's view on minority rights is that special rights are required to protect vulnerable groups and promote fairness. Wilkimlika's view on diversity is that it enhances democracy by ensuring all cultural voices are heard and respected. Nationalism is the belief that nations are a timeless phenomenon. It is based on the belief that people have been attached to the practices connected with their heritage and seeks to continue them freely. The core ideas and principles of nationalism state that nations, self-determination, the nation-state, culturalism, racialism and internationalism shape how national identity and political authority develop. The idea of nation states that people who identify themselves as a cohesive group share values that bind them together as a distinct community. The idea that there are very different ways of defining a nation states that nations can be understood through ethnic ties, civic values, cultural bonds, or political commitments. Based on the idea of nations, the nationalist view on human nature states that humans naturally form attachments to their national community. Based on the idea of nations, the nationalist view on the economy states that economic organization should support the interests and cohesion of the national group. Based on the idea of nations, the nationalist view on society states that society is held together by shared identity, common culture, and collective belonging. Based on the idea of nations, the nationalist view on the state states that the state should defend and embody the identity and will of the nation. The idea of self-determination states that nations should decide how they are governed and pursue their own political destiny. The idea of the nation as a genuine political community capable of self-government states that the nation is seen as a collective with the maturity, unity, and legitimacy to rule itself. Based on the idea of self-determination, the nationalist view on human nature states that people are driven by a desire to shape their political future through their nation. Based on the idea of self-determination, the nationalist view on the economy states that economic control should rest with the nation to sustain independence and autonomy. Based on the idea of self-determination, the nationalist view on society states that society should empower its members to participate in a shared national project. Based on the idea of self-determination, the nationalist view on the state states that the state gains legitimacy from expressing the collective will of the nation. The idea of nation-state states that a nation rules itself in its own state and directs its own economy. The understanding that the nation-state, while supported by most nationalists, is not universally supported states that some nationalists believe identity can flourish without a separate state while others prioritize cultural bonds over territorial sovereignty. Based on the idea of nation-state, the nationalist view on human nature states that humans seek security and fulfillment through membership of a self-governing national community. Based on the idea of nation-state, the nationalist view on the economy states that national control of economic policy protects cultural identity and collective prosperity. Based on the idea of nation-state, the nationalist view on society states that society thrives when unified under a national government that reflects shared identity. Based on the idea of nation-state, the nationalist view on the state states that the state exists to uphold national unity and safeguard independence. The idea of culturalism states that nationalism is based on shared cultural societal values that shape identity and belonging. The idea that some forms of nationalism are grounded in more mystical, emotional ties states that certain nationalisms draw on deep sentiment, symbolism, and historical memory. The idea that some forms of nationalism also reflect on the darker side of nationalism states that emotional nationalism can foster exclusion, intolerance, and conflict. Based on the idea of culturalism, the nationalist view on human nature states that humans are shaped by cultural bonds that connect them to their nation. Based on the idea of culturalism, the nationalist view on the economy states that economic life should preserve and strengthen cultural identity. Based on the idea of culturalism, the nationalist view on society states that society is a cultural community bound by shared traditions and values. Based on the idea of culturalism, the nationalist view on the state states that the state should protect cultural heritage and promote unity. The idea of racialism states that humankind can be meaningfully divided into separate races that possess different natures. The view held by a very small group of nationalists who believe that nationhood is determined purely by biological factors states that these nationalists argue that racial characteristics alone define the boundaries of the nation. Based on the idea of racialism, the nationalist view on human nature states that human behavior and identity are shaped by racial traits. Based on the idea of racialism, the nationalist view on the economy states that economic organization should prioritize the perceived interests of the dominant racial group. Based on the idea of racialism, the nationalist view on society states that society is seen as structured around racial differences and hierarchies. Based on the idea of racialism, the nationalist view on the state states that the state should preserve the purity and dominance of the racial nation. The idea of internationalism states that the world should unite across boundaries to advance common interests in society. The idea that some forms of nationalism also have an internationalist perspective, whereas other internationalists reject nationalism states that certain nationalists see cooperation between nations as enhancing national goals while some internationalists argue that nationalism creates division. Based on the idea of internationalism, the nationalist view on human nature states that humans can pursue national identity while still engaging in global cooperation. Based on the idea of internationalism, the nationalist view on the economy states that economic collaboration can support national prosperity and shared global progress. Based on the idea of internationalism, the nationalist view on society states that societies gain strength by embracing both national community and international solidarity. Based on the idea of internationalism, the nationalist view on the state states that the state can protect national interests while working constructively with other nations. The different types of nationalism include liberal nationalism, conservative nationalism, anti- or post-colonialism, and expansionist nationalism. Liberal nationalism seeks a world of autonomous nation-states united by shared commitment to freedom and equality. The liberal nationalist view on nation states that nations are voluntary communities defined by shared civic values. The liberal nationalist view on self-determination states that all nations possess an equal right to decide their own political future. The liberal nationalist view on the nation-state states that nation-states should coexist peacefully and respect each other's sovereignty. The liberal nationalist view on racialism states that racial distinctions have no legitimate role in defining nationhood. The liberal nationalist view on internationalism states that cooperation between free nations strengthens global harmony. The liberal nationalist view on human nature states that individuals are rational beings capable of forming civic loyalties. The liberal nationalist view on the economy states that economic systems should support liberty and fairness within and between nations. The liberal nationalist view on society states that society should rest on tolerance, civic unity, and equal rights. The liberal nationalist view on the state states that the state should protect individual liberty while expressing the democratic will of the nation. Conservative nationalism exists to forge a sense of cohesion and unity within society through shared history and tradition. The conservative nationalist view on nation states that nations grow organically from long-standing culture and heritage. The conservative nationalist view on self-determination states that national independence protects continuity and social order. The conservative nationalist view on the nation-state states that a strong nation-state preserves identity and safeguards tradition. The conservative nationalist view on racialism states that identity is rooted in culture rather than biological race. The conservative nationalist view on internationalism states that international involvement should be cautious and should not undermine national unity. The conservative nationalist view on human nature states that people are shaped by custom, belonging, and inherited identity. The conservative nationalist view on the economy states that economic policy should strengthen national stability and preserve social harmony. The conservative nationalist view on society states that society depends on shared values, patriotism, and respect for tradition. The conservative nationalist view on the state states that the state should defend national unity and uphold established institutions. Anti- or post-colonialism rejects colonial rule and seeks to have governance return to the indigenous population. The post-colonialist view on nation states that nations oppressed by colonialism must reclaim cultural and political identity. The post-colonialist view on self-determination states that colonized peoples are entitled to recover full autonomy. The post-colonialist view on the nation-state states that creating or restoring a nation-state is essential for liberation. The post-colonialist view on racialism states that racial hierarchies imposed by colonialism must be dismantled. The post-colonialist view on internationalism states that solidarity between formerly colonized nations supports global justice. The post-colonialist view on human nature states that people seek dignity and freedom when liberated from oppression. The post-colonialist view on the economy states that economies must be rebuilt to serve national empowerment rather than colonial interests. The post-colonialist view on society states that society must be repaired through cultural renewal and collective self-worth. The post-colonialist view on the state states that the state must represent the interests of the indigenous population and protect sovereignty. Expansionist nationalism rejects the right of all nations to self-determination and is usually linked to chauvinism. The expansionist nationalist view on nation states that some nations are superior and destined to dominate others. The expansionist nationalist view on self-determination states that only privileged nations deserve autonomy. The expansionist nationalist view on the nation-state states that powerful nations should expand territory to reflect their dominance. The expansionist nationalist view on racialism states that supposed racial superiority justifies hierarchy and conquest. The expansionist nationalist view on internationalism states that international cooperation is undesirable when it restricts national ambition. The expansionist nationalist view on human nature states that humans are driven by competition and the pursuit of supremacy. The expansionist nationalist view on the economy states that economic strength should be used to advance national power. The expansionist nationalist view on society states that society should be united around ideas of superiority and national destiny. The expansionist nationalist view on the state states that the state should mobilize the nation towards expansion and dominance. The key nationalist thinkers include Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Johann Gottfried von Herder, Giuseppe Mazzini, Charles Maurras, and Marcus Garvey. The ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau state that the general will and civic nationalism should shape legitimate political authority. The idea of general will states that government should be based on the indivisible collective will of the community and that nations have the right to govern themselves. The idea of civic nationalism states that the state is legitimate because it is based on the active participation of its citizens. Rousseau's view on self-determination states that nations should freely express their collective will. Rousseau's view on the nation-state states that a legitimate nation-state reflects shared civic commitment. Rousseau's view on culturalism states that civic participation outweighs cultural difference. Rousseau's view on racialism states that race has no place in determining the character of the nation. Rousseau's view on internationalism states that cooperation between nations can flourish when each is guided by its general will. Rousseau's view on human nature states that humans are capable of moral freedom when acting collectively. Rousseau's view on the economy states that economic life should support civic equality and the common good. Rousseau's view on society states that society should be unified through collective participation and shared purpose. Rousseau's view on the state states that the state must be the expression of the general will. The ideas of Johann Gottfried von Herder state that cultural nationalism and the Volk form the foundation of national identity. The idea of cultural nationalism states that every nation is different and that each possesses its own unique cultural character. The idea of Volk states that the people are the root of national culture and special nature known as Volksgeist which each nation should try to express. Herder's view on self-determination states that nations should determine their future through their cultural character. Herder's view on the nation-state states that the nation-state should protect and express the Volk. Herder's view on culturalism states that culture is the essence of nationhood. Herder's view on racialism states that race does not define a nation because culture matters more than biology. Herder's view on internationalism states that nations should respect each other's cultural uniqueness. Herder's view on human nature states that humans are shaped by the cultural world into which they are born. Herder's view on the economy states that economic life should sustain the cultural traditions of the nation. Herder's view on society states that society gains strength from shared culture and inherited customs. Herder's view on the state states that the state should preserve the cultural spirit of the nation. The ideas of Giuseppe Mazzini state that nationhood and action form the basis of human freedom. The idea of nationhood states that humans can fully express themselves only through their nation and that human freedom rests on the creation of one's own nation-state. The idea of action states that intellectualism must be rejected in favor of thought and action. Mazzini's view on self-determination states that nations must act decisively to achieve independence. Mazzini's view on the nation-state states that the nation-state is essential for human flourishing. Mazzini's view on culturalism states that shared moral values unite the nation. Mazzini's view on racialism states that nationhood should not be defined by race. Mazzini's view on internationalism states that free nations should cooperate to advance liberty. Mazzini's view on human nature states that humans strive for moral purpose through national service. Mazzini's view on the economy states that economic life should uphold national unity and virtue. Mazzini's view on society states that society should be inspired by patriotic duty and collective purpose. Mazzini's view on the state states that the state should guide the nation toward moral and political progress. The ideas of Charles Maurras state that integral nationalism and militarism shape a powerful and unified nation. The idea of integral nationalism states that individuals should submerge themselves into their nation through intense emotional loyalty. The idea of militarism states that integral nationalism encourages nations to cultivate a strong military ethos. Maurras's view on self-determination states that national unity is more important than democratic choice. Moraz's view on the nation-state states that a strong authoritarian state should embody national values. Moraz's view on culturalism states that national culture must be strictly preserved. Moraz's view on racialism states that some groups threaten the purity of the nation. Moraz's view on internationalism states that international cooperation weakens national strength. Moraz's view on human nature states that humans require order and hierarchy to flourish. Moraz's view on the economy states that economic policy should strengthen national power and social unity. Moraz's view on society states that society should be strictly ordered to maintain national cohesion. Moraz's view on the state states that the state should be authoritarian to protect national identity. The ideas of Marcus Garvey state that Black pride and Pan-Africanism aim to unite African people across the world. The idea of Black pride states that African people should be proud of their race and recognize beauty in their own kind. The idea of Pan-Africanism states that African people everywhere are one people who must put aside cultural and ethnic differences to progress. Garvey's view on self-determination states that African people must reclaim control over their own destiny. Garvey's view on the nation-state states that a united African nation-state is necessary for empowerment. Garvey's view on culturalism states that shared heritage strengthens unity across the African diaspora. Garvey's view on racialism states that racial solidarity is essential for liberation. Garvey's view on internationalism states that global unity among African peoples is vital for progress. Garvey's view on human nature states that humans gain strength from pride in their identity. Garvey's view on the economy states that economic independence is essential for racial uplift. Garvey's view on society states that society should be built on unity and collective purpose. Garvey's view on the state states that the state should protect and advance the interests of African people worldwide. Thank you for watching this video on UK government and non-core political ideas. I'll see you in the next one.